At 18, with bruises hidden beneath her sleeves and hope dying in her chest, Lydia Rowan answered a newspaper ad from a stranger promising not just a home, but love. They said mail-order brides were desperate women sold to lonely men. But when a blizzard threatened to take everything, when blood stained the snow and death whispered at the door, Lydia discovered the truth. Some promises are worth dying for. This is her story, one of courage, heartbreak, and a love that refused to be anything less than real. Stay with me until the end and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lydia's journey reaches. The bucket was too heavy. Lydia Rowan knew this the moment her aunt shoved it into her hands, sloshing gray water over the rim and soaking through her already threadbare dress. The cold bit through the thin fabric, making her gasp, but she didn't drop it. She never dropped anything. That would give Aunt Margaret another reason to strike, and Lydia had learned long ago to give the woman as few reasons as possible. "Well?" Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the dim hallway of the boarding house like a rusted blade. "Are you going to stand there gawking like the useless creature you are, or are you going to scrub those floors before the tenants wake?" "Yes, Aunt Margaret." Lydia's voice was barely a whisper, trained into submission over 6 long years. "Speak up, girl. Lord knows your mother never taught you proper manners before she had the decency to die and leave you on my doorstep." The words struck harder than any hand ever could. Lydia's fingers tightened around the bucket handle, her knuckles going white. She wanted to scream, to throw the water in her aunt's pinched, bitter face, to tell her that her mother had been kind and warm and everything this cold woman would never be. But she said nothing. She never did. Instead, Lydia carried the bucket to the far end of the hallway and sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor. The boards were old, splintered in places, and they dug into her skin through her dress. She plunged the brush into the water and began to scrub, her movements mechanical, practiced. This was her life now. This was all it had been since the fever took her mother when Lydia was 12. Scrubbing, cleaning, serving, invisible. The boarding house stood in the grimy heart of Philadelphia, a 3-story building that leaned slightly to the left and smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and tobacco smoke. Aunt Margaret owned it, or rather, she owned the debt that came with it, and she ran it with an iron fist and a tongue that could flay skin. She rented rooms to railroad workers, traveling salesmen, and the occasional woman of questionable reputation. She kept the rates low and the standards lower, and she worked Lydia like a borrowed mule she intended to return broken. "You missed a spot." Lydia looked up to find her aunt looming over her, arms crossed over her considerable bosom, lips pressed into a thin line of perpetual displeasure. "Where, Aunt Margaret?" "There." A gnarled finger pointed to a section of floor that looked identical to every other section. "Are you blind as well as stupid?" "No, ma'am." "Then fix it. And when you're done with this floor, the kitchen needs scrubbing. Mr. Brennan vomited in the hallway again last night. You'll need to clean that too, and the chamber pots need emptying, all of them." Lydia's stomach turned at the thought, but she nodded. "Yes, Aunt Margaret." The older woman sniffed, her eyes traveling over Lydia with the same expression she might give a stain on the wallpaper. "You're 18 now, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am, last month." 18 and still underfoot. Your mother was married at 16, pregnant at 17, dead at 24. At least she was useful for something before she died. Aunt Margaret's lips twisted into something that might have been a smile on a kinder face. "Though I suppose if you couldn't even keep your own mother alive, you're not much use to anyone." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Lydia felt them settle into her chest, into the hollow place where hope used to live. She wanted to say that it wasn't her fault, that she was only 12, that she'd begged the doctor to come but they had no money for his fee. She wanted to say that she'd held her mother's hand until the very end, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. But Aunt Margaret had already turned away, her heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. Lydia scrubbed until her hands were raw and red, until the water in the bucket turned black with grime. She emptied it in the alley behind the boarding house, where rats skittered between overflowing trash bins and the air smelled of rot and human waste. The November wind cut through her dress, and she shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Winter was coming. Last year, Aunt Margaret had forgotten to give Lydia a winter coat, and she'd spent the coldest months wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket, her lips blue, and her fingers so numb she could barely feel them. This year would likely be the same. This year, and the next, and the one after that. Forever. The thought made something crack inside her chest, a hairline fracture in the careful wall she'd built around her heart. She was 18 years old, and this was her life. There would be no rescue, no prince on a white horse, no sudden inheritance from a distant relative. There was only this, scrubbing floors until her back bent permanently, sleeping in a closet-sized room with a broken window, eating leftovers from other people's plates, dying slowly, one day at a time. "I can't," she whispered to the rats in the rotting garbage. "I can't do this anymore." But what choice did she have? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a crumpled newspaper. Lydia found it in Mr. Pemberton's room while changing his sheets. He was a traveling salesman, rarely home, and he had a habit of leaving newspapers scattered across his floor. Normally, Lydia would gather them for kindling, but this one caught her eye because of the headline on the back page: Matrimonial Opportunities Out West. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the paper across the unmade bed. She'd heard whispers of such things, advertisements from lonely men on the frontier seeking wives through the mail. The other servants at neighboring houses sometimes gossiped about girls who'd taken such chances, who'd fled East Coast misery for Western uncertainty. Desperate women for desperate men, they'd said, giggling nervously, probably end up murdered or worse. But as Lydia scanned the columns of advertisements, she didn't see desperation. She saw possibility. Rancher in Montana seeks sturdy wife for homestead life. Must be able to cook and sew. Widower with 3 children needs mother and companion. Farm experience preferred. Colorado cattle rancher, 32, seeks wife with a heart that wishes to be loved. I can offer a home, respect, and a chance at happiness. I cannot offer wealth, but I can promise honesty and kindness. Lydia's fingers stopped on that last one. She read it again, her heart beating faster with each word. A heart that wishes to be loved. When was the last time someone had loved her? Her mother, yes, but that was 6 years ago. 6 years of being told she was worthless, unwanted, a burden. 6 years of believing it. But this man, this stranger in Colorado, he wasn't looking for a servant. He was looking for someone to love. The thought was so foreign, so impossibly beautiful, that Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "What are you doing?" She spun around to find Aunt Margaret in the doorway, her face purple with rage. I was just changing the sheets, reading Mr. Pemberton's newspaper." Her aunt crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched the paper from Lydia's hands. "Thieving now, are we?" "No, I wasn't stealing. I was just—" The slap came hard and fast, snapping Lydia's head to the side. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut the inside of her mouth. "Don't you dare talk back to me, girl." Aunt Margaret's face was inches from hers now, her breath hot and sour. "You're lucky I took you in when your mother died. Lucky I didn't toss you into the street like the worthless orphan you are. You think anyone else would have you? You think you're special?" Lydia said nothing, her hand pressed to her burning cheek. "Answer me." "No, Aunt Margaret, I don't think I'm special. That's right. You're nothing, nobody, and you'd do well to remember that." She crumpled the newspaper and threw it at Lydia's feet. "Finish these rooms, and if I catch you shirking again, you'll sleep in the cellar with the rats." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Lydia stood frozen for a long moment, her cheek throbbing, her heart racing. Then, slowly, she bent down and picked up the crumpled newspaper. She smoothed it out carefully, her hands shaking, and tore out the advertisement. Colorado cattle rancher, 32, seeks wife with a heart that wishes to be loved. She folded it into a small square and tucked it into the pocket of her dress, right next to her mother's old handkerchief, the only thing she had left of her. That night, alone in her tiny room with the broken window letting in the November cold, Lydia made a decision. She was going to answer that advertisement. But finding paper and ink proved harder than she'd expected. Aunt Margaret kept such supplies locked in her office, and Lydia had no key. But she remembered that Mr. Pemberton sometimes left his writing case in his room, and 2 days later, when she knew he was out selling kitchen gadgets door to door, She slipped into his room and borrowed a single sheet of paper and enough ink to fill a small vial. She felt guilty. She'd never stolen anything before, but desperation had a way of redrawing moral lines. That night, by the light of a single candle she'd saved from the kitchen, another theft, another small betrayal of the girl she used to be, Lydia composed her letter. She started 7 times. The first attempt was too formal, too cold. The second was too desperate, practically begging. The third revealed too much about her circumstances. She didn't want pity. The fourth was too cheerful, too false. The fifth was too long. The sixth too short. The seventh came from somewhere deep inside her, from the part that remembered her mother's smile and the sound of her father's laugh before the factory accident took him, from the part that still believed, despite everything, that she deserved more than this. Dear Sir, my name is Lydia Rowan, and I am 18 years old. I saw your advertisement in the Philadelphia newspaper, and your words gave me courage to write this letter. I must be honest with you from the start, as you promised honesty yourself. I have no family to speak of. My parents are both deceased, and I currently live with my aunt. I have no money, no dowry, no property. I can offer you only myself, my willingness to work hard, to be a good wife, and to build a life with you. You wrote that you seek someone with a heart that wishes to be loved. I believe I have such a heart, though it has not been shown much love in recent years. I can cook and clean and sew. I can read and write. I am healthy and strong, despite what my current circumstances might suggest. But more than any of these things, I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and the sincere effort to make you happy. I know this is unconventional. I know you might read this and think me desperate or foolish. Perhaps I am both. But I'm also hopeful, and hope is something I have not felt in a very long time. If you are willing to take a chance on someone like me, please write to me at the address below. I will be watching for your reply. Yours sincerely, Lydia Rowan. She gave the address of the boarding house and added a note. Please mark the envelope, attention, household supplies, so it will not be questioned. Her hand shook as she folded the letter. This was insane. She was writing to a complete stranger, offering to marry him, to travel hundreds of miles to a place she'd never seen. He could be cruel. He could be a liar. He could be worse than Aunt Margaret. But he could also be exactly what he claimed, a lonely man seeking companionship, offering kindness in return. And wasn't that a chance worth taking? The next morning, before dawn, Lydia slipped out of the boarding house. She walked 6 blocks to the post office, her mother's handkerchief wrapped around 3 pennies she'd saved over the course of a month. The price of a stamp. Her breath made clouds in the cold air, and her shoes had holes that let in the damp, but she barely noticed. She handed the letter to the clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. Colorado, he said, reading the address. That's a long way. Yes, sir. Running away from something or running toward something? Lydia met his eyes. Both. He nodded slowly, stamped the letter, and placed it in the outgoing mail bin. Good luck, miss. Thank you. She walked back to the boarding house as the sun rose, painting the dirty streets of Philadelphia in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in 6 years, Lydia felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Hope. The waiting was agony. Every day, Lydia rushed to finish her morning chores so she could watch for the postman from the front window. Every day she felt her hope dim a little more when he passed by with nothing for her. One week became 2, 2 became 3. He's not going to write, she told herself on the 21st day, scrubbing the front steps in the freezing rain. Why would he? I'm nobody. Nothing, just like Aunt Margaret says. But on the 23rd day, the postman stopped. Lydia saw him from the second-floor window where she was dusting. She watched him reach into his bag and pull out a thick envelope marked household supplies. Her heart stopped. She flew down the stairs, nearly tripping over her skirts, and flung open the front door just as the postman was sliding the envelope through the mail slot. Oh! He jumped back, startled. Eager for the mail today, are we? Is that for me? He checked the envelope. Says household supplies care of this address. You the housekeeper? Yes, Lydia lied, snatching the envelope from his hands. Yes, that's me. Thank you. She slammed the door before he could respond and ran back to her room, her hands trembling so badly she could barely break the seal. Inside was a letter, written in a careful, masculine hand. Dear Miss Rowan, I received your letter 3 days ago and have read it no fewer than 20 times since. I hope you will forgive my delayed response. I wanted to write something worthy of your courage in writing to me first. Let me begin with honesty, as you did. My name is Grant Mercer. I am 32 years old and have owned a cattle ranch outside of Stillwater, Colorado for the past 8 years. The ranch is small, 200 acres, and the house is modest, but it is mine, free and clear of debt. I built it with my brother Daniel, who died of pneumonia 3 years ago. Since then, I have lived alone. I will not lie to you about the life here. The work is hard. The winters are harsh. The nearest town is 6 miles away, and I go there perhaps once a month for supplies. We are far from the civilization and comforts you know in Philadelphia. The land is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving. You say you have no money or property to offer, but Miss Rowan, I am not seeking a business arrangement. I am seeking a companion, a partner, someone to share this life with. Your willingness to work hard, to be honest, to try. These are worth more than any dowry. I know this is a great deal to ask of you. I know you would be leaving everything familiar behind, taking a tremendous leap of faith in a stranger's word. All I can offer you in return is this. I promise to treat you with respect and kindness. I promise to protect you and provide for you to the best of my ability. I promise that you will have your own space and time to decide if I, am what you want. You will never be a servant in my home. You will be my wife, my equal partner. If you are willing to take this chance, I will send you money for a train ticket. The journey will take approximately 4 days. I would propose that we marry shortly after your arrival, as is customary in these arrangements, but I want you to know that I will not force anything upon you. You will have time to know me, to decide if you can build a life here. I will understand if you do not write back. This is a frightening prospect, and I am a stranger asking you to trust me with your future. But if you do decide to come, know that I will be waiting at the Stillwater station, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy. Yours in hope, Grant Mercer. P.S. You mentioned you can read and write. I wonder, do you like books? I have a small collection, mostly Dickens and Twain, and it would be nice to have someone to discuss them with. Lydia read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. He sounded kind, honest, lonely, like her, and he'd asked about books. She pressed the letter to her chest and made her decision. Sent. Writing back was easier this time. She told him yes, she would come. Yes, she would marry him. And yes, she loved books. Her mother used to read to her before she died, and it was one of her most precious memories. She mailed the letter the next morning. Grant's response came faster this time. Only 12 days. Inside the envelope was another letter and a train ticket from Philadelphia to Stillwater, Colorado, dated for 3 weeks hence. Dear Lydia, he'd dropped the formal Miss Rowan, and the intimacy of her first name made her heart race. I cannot express how happy your letter made me. I have enclosed a ticket for December 15th. If this is too soon, please write, and I will send another for a later date. I know you may need time to prepare, to say goodbye to those you love. I have also enclosed $20 for traveling clothes and supplies you may need for the journey. Please use it as you see fit. The train ride will be long, so bring something to read and food for the journey, as the dining car can be expensive. I will be waiting at the Stillwater station on the 19th of December at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon when your train is scheduled to arrive. I will be the tall man wearing a brown hat and looking nervous. I am counting the days. Yours, Grant. Lydia stared at the $20 bill tucked into the envelope. It was more money than she'd ever held in her life. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to prepare for a new life. 3 weeks to escape. She told no one, of course. Aunt Margaret would never allow it, would lock her in the cellar, or worse if she even suspected Lydia was planning to leave. So Lydia went about her days as usual, scrubbing, cleaning, serving, while secretly making her preparations. She used $5 of Grant's money to buy a small carpet bag from a second-hand store. Into it, she carefully packed her mother's Bible with her parents' names written on the inside cover, the dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral, faded but still decent, 2 pairs of stockings she'd mended more times than she could count, her mother's handkerchief, a tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to her grandmother, a small sewing kit, Grant's letters, tied with a string. She hid the bag under her narrow bed and waited. December 14th arrived cold and clear. Lydia barely slept that night, lying awake and listening to the boarding house settle around her. At 3 a.m, she rose, dressed in her warmest clothes, which weren't very warm at all, and retrieved her bag. She paused at the door of her tiny room, looking back at the space that had been her prison for 6 years. The broken window, the stained walls, the floor that never seemed to come clean no matter how hard she scrubbed. She felt nothing but relief to leave it behind. The boarding house was silent as she crept down the stairs. She'd oiled the hinges on the front door 2 days ago, and it swung open without a sound. The winter air hit her like a slap, stealing her breath, but she pulled her thin shawl tighter and stepped out into the darkness. She didn't look back. The train station was a mile away. Lydia walked quickly, her bag clutched tight, her heart pounding. Every sound made her jump. What if Aunt Margaret had heard her leave? What if she was following? What if the police stopped her, thinking her a runaway? But the streets were empty, and she reached the station as the first train of the morning was beginning to board. "Ticket," the conductor said, barely glancing at her. Lydia handed him her precious ticket, praying he wouldn't question a young woman traveling alone. He punched it and handed it back. 4 days to Colorado. You got food?" "Yes, sir." She'd used another $1 to buy bread, cheese, and apples, enough to last the journey if she was careful. "Platform 3. Train leaves in 20 minutes. "Thank you." She climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, tucking her bag carefully at her feet. The compartment was nearly empty at this hour, just an elderly couple dozing in the corner and a businessman reading a newspaper. Lydia watched through the window as the platform began to fill with passengers. Her heart was in her throat, certain that at any moment she would see Aunt Margaret's furious face, would hear her shrill voice demanding Lydia come back. But the minutes ticked by, and there was no sign of her. Finally, with a great hiss of steam and a lurching jolt, the train began to move. Lydia pressed her face to the cold glass, watching Philadelphia slip away, the dirty streets, the cramped buildings, the life she was leaving behind. The city where she'd been born, where she'd lost everything, where she'd been nothing but a burden and a servant. As the train picked up speed, carrying her west toward an uncertain future and a man she'd never met, Lydia felt something wet on her cheeks. She was crying. But for the first time in 6 years, they were tears of hope, not despair. The journey was long and exhausting. The train rattled and swayed, stopping at what felt like every small town between Philadelphia and Colorado. Lydia watched the landscape change through her window, the crowded eastern cities giving way to farmland, then to rolling plains, then to something wild and vast that took her breath away. She'd never seen so much space, so much sky. The other passengers changed too, as some left and others boarded. The businessman was replaced by a family with 3 noisy children. The elderly couple departed in Pittsburgh, and a young couple clearly on their honeymoon took their place, giggling and whispering and making Lydia blush with their obvious affection. At night, she tried to sleep sitting up, her carpetbag clutched to her chest, but the seats were hard and the train was loud. She dozed fitfully, dreaming of her mother, of Aunt Margaret's cruel voice, of a tall man in a brown hat whose face she couldn't see. What if Grant took one look at her and was disappointed? What if she arrived and he'd changed his mind? What if this was all a terrible mistake? The doubts plagued her, growing stronger with each mile. By the 3rd day, Lydia was exhausted, hungry, her food had run out, and terrified. On the morning of the 4th day, a woman across the aisle leaned over. "First time out west?" she asked kindly. Lydia nodded. "I thought so. You've got that look, scared and excited all at once." The woman smiled. "I'm Mrs. Henderson. Are you meeting family in Colorado?" Lydia hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm meeting my fiancé." "Oh, how lovely. He's from Colorado then?" "Yes, ma'am. He has a ranch near Stillwater." "A rancher?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes sparkled. "Well, that's fine work. Hard work, mind you, but honest. Is it a mail order arrangement?" Lydia felt her cheeks burn. "Yes, ma'am." She expected judgment, but Mrs. Henderson just nodded approvingly. "Nothing to be ashamed of, dear. My own sister met her husband through an advertisement, and they've been married 20 years now. Sometimes fate needs a little help from the postal service." She patted Lydia's hand. What's his name? Grant. Grant Mercer. And do you love him? Lydia blinked, surprised by the directness of the question. I don't know him yet. But do you think you could love him? She thought of his letters, carefully written, full of honesty and kindness. She thought of how he'd promised to give her space, to treat her with respect. She thought of the $20 he'd sent, trusting a stranger not to simply take it and run. Yes, Lydia said softly. I think I could. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Then you're already halfway there. The train pulled into Stillwater Station at 2:17 p.m. on December 19th, 1887. Lydia stood on shaking legs, gathering her carpetbag and trying to smooth her hopelessly wrinkled dress. Through the window she could see the platform, a simple wooden structure with a small station house and a hand-painted sign reading Stillwater. Beyond it, the town was tiny, maybe 24 buildings clustered along a single dirt road. Behind them, mountains rose up like giants, their peaks white with snow. It was the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever seen, and the most terrifying. Good luck, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, squeezing her hand one last time. Thank you. Lydia stepped down from the train on trembling legs, her breath making clouds in the cold mountain air. The platform was crowded with people, families greeting each other, men loading cargo, a dog barking excitedly. And standing apart from all of them, looking exactly as nervous as he'd promised, was a tall man in a brown hat. Their eyes met across the platform. Grant Mercer was not handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, too sun-worn, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard work and long days outdoors. His shoulders were broad, his hands large and calloused where they gripped his hat. He looked older than 32, but perhaps that was just the frontier aging him. But his eyes were kind, uncertain, hopeful. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid he might frighten her. Lydia took a breath, picked up her bag, and walked toward him. Miss Rowan? His voice was deep, roughened by disuse, as if he didn't speak often. Mr. Mercer. They stood there for a long moment, two strangers who had promised to spend their lives together, taking each other's measure. You came, Grant finally said, and there was such relief in his voice that Lydia felt something tighten in her chest. I said I would. I know, but I thought maybe you'd change your mind, or that something would prevent you, or that I dreamed it all. He was turning his hat in his hands, clearly nervous. I'm glad you're here. So am I. Another pause. Then Grant seemed to remember himself. You must be exhausted and hungry. There's a hotel in town. I've arranged a room for you. I thought you might like to rest and clean up before we... He trailed off, his ears turning red. Before we get married, Lydia finished softly. Yes. He met her eyes again. Unless you need more time. I understand if... I don't need more time, Mr. Mercer. I made my decision when I boarded that train. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or gratitude. Then, tomorrow? Would that be acceptable? It would give you tonight to rest, and to be sure. Lydia thought about the money she didn't have, about the life she'd left behind, about the fact that she had nowhere else to go even if she wanted to. But more than that, she thought about his letters, about his promise of kindness and respect. Tomorrow would be fine. Grant nodded, relief evident on his face. He reached for her bag and Lydia handed it to him, noticing how careful he was not to let their fingers touch. He was giving her space, she realized, respecting boundaries she hadn't even needed to voice. Come on then, he said quietly. Let's get you settled. As they walked together off the platform toward the small town of Stillwater, toward a future neither of them could predict, Lydia felt that flutter of hope again. She had taken the leap. Now, for better or worse, she would see where she landed. The hotel was a modest two-story building with peeling white paint and a sign that read Stillwater Inn in faded letters. Grant held the door open for Lydia, and she stepped into a small lobby that smelled of wood smoke and coffee. A woman behind the desk looked up, her eyes moving between Grant and Lydia with undisguised curiosity. This is the young lady, then? The woman asked, her voice warm but probing. Yes, ma'am. Miss Lydia Rowan, this is Mrs. Callahan. She owns the inn. Pleased to meet you, dear. Mrs. Callahan's eyes softened as she took in Lydia's worn dress and exhausted face. "You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal." "That would be wonderful," Lydia admitted, suddenly aware of how she must look after 4 days on a train. "Room's ready, just as you asked, Grant. Top of the stairs, second door on the right." Mrs. Callahan handed him a key, then turned back to Lydia. "I'll bring up some hot water and a tray of food in about 20 minutes. You just rest yourself, honey." "Thank you." Grant carried her bag up the narrow staircase, and Lydia followed, acutely aware of how alone they were, how improper this would seem back in Philadelphia. But this wasn't Philadelphia, and the rules seemed different here. He unlocked the door to reveal a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. It was simple, but after 6 years of sleeping in a closet-sized space with a broken window, it looked like luxury. "I'll pay Mrs. Callahan for tonight and breakfast in the morning," Grant said, setting her bag on the bed. "And I'll come by around 10 o'clock tomorrow if that suits you. The Reverend said he could perform the ceremony at 11. Lydia turned to face him, this stranger who would be her husband in less than a day. He stood awkwardly by the door, hat still in his hands, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, "thank you for all of this. For the ticket, for the room, for giving me a chance." His expression shifted, something vulnerable crossing his face. "I should be thanking you. You're the one taking the real risk here, coming all this way to marry a man you've never met. I'm just grateful you answered my advertisement." "Why did you place it?" The question came out before Lydia could stop it. "You seem like a good man. Surely there are women here in Stillwater who would—" "There are 3 unmarried women in Stillwater," Grant interrupted, a slight smile touching his lips. "Sally Martin is 17 and has her heart set on the blacksmith's son. Widow Perkins is 62 and has sworn off men entirely after 3 husbands. And Miss Henrietta Grove made it abundantly clear 2 years ago that she'd rather die an old maid than marry a cattle rancher." Despite herself, Lydia smiled. "I see. The truth is, Miss Rowan, Lydia, I'm not good with people, never have been. I can talk to cattle just fine, and horses seem to understand me, but put me in a room full of people and I—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "My brother Daniel, he was the charming one. He could make friends with a fence post. But me, I don't know how to do it. The advertisement seemed easier somehow. I could put down on paper what I couldn't say out loud." Lydia understood that more than he knew. "Your letters were very kind." "I meant every word." He met her eyes, and she saw the sincerity there. "I know tomorrow will be awkward. I know we're practically strangers. But I want you to know that I'll do my best to be a good husband to you. I'll give you time to adjust, time to decide if you can be happy here. And if you can't," he swallowed hard. "If you can't, I'll understand." "Where would I go?" Lydia asked quietly. "I'd give you money for a ticket back east, or to somewhere else if you preferred. You wouldn't be trapped here, Lydia. I'm not that kind of man." She believed him. Maybe that made her foolish, but she believed him. "I'll see you tomorrow morning then," Grant said, backing toward the door. "Tomorrow morning." He paused at the threshold, turned back. "Lydia, I'm glad you're here. Truly." Then he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Lydia sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak. Mrs. Callahan arrived a few minutes later with hot water and a tray of stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Lydia ate every bite, then bathed in the tin tub the innkeeper's husband brought up, scrubbing away 4 days of train grime. She washed her hair with the sliver of soap Mrs. Callahan had provided, combed it out with her grandmother's tortoiseshell comb, and climbed into bed wearing her cleanest shift. The sheets were crisp and smelled of lavender. The mattress was soft. Through the window she could hear the sounds of Stillwater settling in for the night. Voices calling goodnight, a dog barking, someone playing a fiddle. Tomorrow she would marry Grant Mercer. Tomorrow her life would change completely. Lydia pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat fast beneath her palm. She wasn't sure if she was more terrified or excited. Maybe both. She fell asleep, still wondering. The wedding took place in a small white church at the edge of town. Lydia wore her mother's funeral dress, which she'd done her best to press with the iron Mrs. Callahan had loaned her. It was plain black wool, severe and unflattering, but it was all she had. She'd tried to dress it up with her mother's handkerchief tucked into the neckline, but she still felt like she was going to a burial rather than a wedding. Grant was already there when she arrived, wearing what was clearly his best suit, a brown jacket and trousers that looked stiff and uncomfortable on his large frame. His hair was slicked back with water, and he'd shaved so closely that she could see a small nick on his jaw. He looked terrified. The Reverend was a small, cheerful man named Pastor Williams, who seemed determined to make the best of the awkward situation. Mrs. Callahan and her husband served as witnesses, standing off to the side with encouraging smiles. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice echoing in the empty church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Lydia barely heard the words. She was too focused on trying to keep her hands from shaking on the way Grant stood perfectly still beside her like a man facing a firing squad, on the surreal reality that in a few minutes she would be married. "Grant Mercer, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Grant's voice was steady. "I do." "And do you, Lydia Rowan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" This was it. Her last chance to change her mind, to run, to choose a different path. But what other path was there? "I do," Lydia whispered. "Do you have rings?" Grant fumbled in his pocket and produced 2 simple gold bands. His hands shook slightly as he slipped one onto Lydia's finger. It was too large, but she closed her hand around it, holding it in place. She took the other ring and slid it onto Grant's finger. His hand was warm, calloused, strong. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Grant went very still. Lydia held her breath. Then very carefully, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a chaste, brief touch that somehow felt more intimate than any real kiss could have been. "Congratulations!" Mrs. Callahan rushed forward to embrace Lydia. "Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you both." Mr. Callahan shook Grant's hand vigorously. Pastor Williams beamed at them both. And just like that, it was done. Lydia Rowan was now Lydia Mercer. Grant had brought a wagon, and he helped Lydia up onto the seat with the same careful distance he'd maintained since meeting her. Her small carpet bag sat in the back, looking pathetically insignificant. Mrs. Callahan had packed them a basket of food for the journey, which Grant accepted with quiet thanks. As they pulled away from the church, Lydia looked back at Stillwater, the small cluster of buildings that represented the last bit of civilization she might see for a while. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," Grant said, breaking the silence. "The road gets rough in places, so hold on." "All right." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking beneath them, the horses' hooves clopping steadily on the frozen ground. The landscape opened up around them, vast and empty, and startlingly beautiful. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touching the sky. The air was cold and clean, nothing like the smoke-choked streets of Philadelphia. "Are you warm enough?" Grant asked. Yes. She wasn't really, but she didn't want to complain. He must have sensed the lie because he reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, draping it over her lap without a word. "Thank you." Another stretch of silence. Then Grant cleared his throat. "I should tell you about the ranch. I don't want you to be disappointed when we arrive." "All right. It's not much. 200 acres, like I said in my letters, but only about 50 are really usable for cattle. The rest is too rocky or steep. The house is small, just 4 rooms. My brother and I built it ourselves, so it's sturdy, but it's not fancy. No wallpaper or nice furniture or anything like that." "I'm not expecting fancy, Mr. Mercer." "Grant," he corrected softly. "We're married now. You should call me Grant." "Grant?" she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "And you should call me Lydia." "Lydia." He said it carefully, like he was afraid of breaking it. "Pretty name." "It was my grandmother's." "The one who owned the comb?" She was surprised he remembered that detail from her letters. "Yes." "What was she like?" No one had asked Lydia about her family in years, Aunt Margaret certainly never wanted to hear about them. The question opened something in her chest. She was kind, Lydia said quietly. She used to tell me stories about Ireland, where she was born. She came to America when she was 16, all alone, to work as a housemaid. She said it was the scariest thing she ever did, but also the best. She met my grandfather at the house where she worked. He was a gardener. They married and had 5 children, though only my mother survived to adulthood. That's hard. She said it made her grateful for every day she had with the ones who lived. She died when I was 8, but I still remember her voice, the way she smelled like bread and lavender. Lydia touched the comb in her hair. This is all I have left of her. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother died when I was 10. She got kicked by a horse and never woke up. My father, he wasn't the same after, started drinking. Daniel and I mostly raised ourselves. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but his voice said it still hurt. Father died 5 years back. Liver gave out. Daniel and I took what little money he left and came west, bought this land. We were going to build something together, make something of ourselves. His hands tightened on the reins. Then Daniel got sick. It was just a cold at first, or so we thought, but it settled in his lungs, and 3 weeks later he was gone. I buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch. He loved that spot. You must miss him terribly. Every day. Grant's voice was rough. The house feels too quiet now, too empty. I find myself starting to tell him something, turning around to where he should be, and nothing, just empty space. Lydia understood that feeling too well. After my mother died, I used to set 2 places at the table out of habit. Aunt Margaret would hit me for wasting a plate, but I kept doing it. I couldn't seem to remember that she was gone. They looked at each other, 2 people who had lost everyone they loved, who had built walls around the grief and learned to carry it alone. Maybe that's why we'll understand each other, Grant said finally. We both know what it's like to be lonely. It wasn't a romantic sentiment, but somehow it felt more honest than any declaration of love could have been. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, and Lydia's breath caught. It was nestled in a valley between 2 slopes, protected from the worst of the wind. The house was small, as Grant had warned, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. Cattle dotted the winter fields, dark shapes against the snow. And beyond it all, the mountains rose up, majestic and eternal. It's beautiful, Lydia whispered. Grant looked at her in surprise. You think so? I've never seen anything like it. In Philadelphia, all I ever saw were buildings and smoke. This is... She struggled to find the words. It's like the whole world opened up. Something in Grant's expression softened. Daniel used to say that too. He said living here made him feel small and large at the same time. Small because the mountains make you realize how tiny you are. Large because all that space makes you feel like you can breathe for the first time. Lydia knew exactly what he meant. Grant pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Lydia down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, strong and warm, then released her the moment she had her balance. Welcome home, he said quietly. Home. Lydia tested the word in her mind. Could this place really be home? The inside of the house was clean but sparse. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a wood stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a single armchair near the fireplace. Everything was neat, almost militarily so, as if Grant had scrubbed the place from top to bottom before her arrival. I'll show you around, Grant said, setting her bag down. This is the main room, obviously. Kitchen area there. That door leads to my bedroom. He pointed to a door on the left. And that one there is yours. Mine? He looked uncomfortable. I told you in my letter that I'd give you your own space. I meant it. The room's not large, but it has a bed and a bureau and a window. I thought you might like some privacy while you settle in. Lydia opened the door to reveal a small room with a neatly made bed, a simple bureau, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was plain, but it was clean and private and hers. She turned back to Grant, something tight in her throat. Thank you. There's a room behind the kitchen for storage, and that's about it. Like I said, not much. It's more than I had before, Lydia said honestly. Much more. Grant looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to figure out if she meant it. Then he nodded. I'll bring in some more firewood. It gets cold at night, and I'll show you where things are. The well, the barn, the hen house. We've got 6 chickens. They're not laying much this time of year, but come spring they'll pick up. I can take care of them, Lydia offered. I'm used to working. You're not a servant here, Lydia. You're my wife. Wives work too, she pointed out, and I'll go mad if I have nothing to do. A small smile crossed his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered features, making him look younger, less burdened. Fair enough. I'll teach you the routine. But for today, why don't you just settle in, unpack your things, rest? You've had a long journey. What will you do? I've got cattle to check on, fence that needs mending, the usual work. He pulled his coat back on. I'll be back around sunset. There's food in the larder, bread, cheese, some dried meat. Help yourself to whatever you need. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Lydia alone in her new home. She stood in the middle of the main room, listening to the silence. It was different from the silence of her tiny room at the boarding house. That silence had been oppressive, suffocating. This silence felt peaceful, like the house was breathing quietly around her. Lydia unpacked her meager belongings, placing her mother's Bible on the small table beside her bed, hanging her spare dress in the bureau. It took all of 5 minutes. Then she explored the house more thoroughly, opening cupboards and drawers, learning where Grant kept things. Everything was organized and clean. The man clearly ran a tight household. In the kitchen, she found flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, dried beans, and a jar of preserved peaches. Not a lot, but enough. The larder was cool and well-stocked with root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, onions. She could work with this. By the time sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lydia had made bread dough and set it to rise, peeled potatoes, and started a stew on the stove. She'd also swept the floors, washed the windows, and organized the kitchen more efficiently. Old habits died hard. She heard Grant's footsteps on the porch and quickly wiped her hands on her apron, one she'd found hanging on a hook and assumed had belonged to his brother. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of cold air and livestock with him. He stopped short when he saw the table set for 2, the stew bubbling on the stove, the fresh bread cooling on the counter. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. I told you, I'll go mad with nothing to do. Grant hung up his coat and hat, then stood awkwardly by the door as if unsure what to do next. Would you like to wash up before supper? Lydia suggested. Yes. Thank you. He disappeared into his room and emerged a few minutes later with his face scrubbed and his hair dampened down. They sat at the table, and Lydia served the stew and bread. Grant took a bite, and his eyebrows rose. This is good. Really good. It's just stew. Maybe, but it's the best stew I've had in 3 years. I'm not much of a cook. I mostly just fry things until they're edible. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grant said, You cleaned. A bit. I hope you don't mind. Mind? The place hasn't looked this good since... He trailed off, and Lydia knew he was thinking of his brother. Thank you. After supper, Grant insisted on washing the dishes while Lydia put away the leftover bread. They moved around each other carefully in the small kitchen, both hyper-aware of not touching, not getting too close. I usually read for a bit before bed, Grant said when the dishes were done. You're welcome to join me by the fire, or if you're tired, you should rest. Lydia wasn't tired. She was too nervous, too aware that this was her wedding night, even if it wasn't going to be a traditional one. I'd like to read, she said. If you don't mind the company. I invited you, didn't I? Grant built up the fire while Lydia settled into the armchair. He brought over several books and set them on the small table beside her. Dickens, Twain, some Shakespeare. There's a Bible too, if you prefer. Lydia picked up a worn copy of David Copperfield and settled in to read. Grant sat on the floor by the fire with his own book, and for the next hour the only sounds were the crackling of the flames and the occasional turning of pages. It was, Lydia thought, the most peaceful evening she'd spent in 6 years. When the clock on the mantel chimed 9, Grant stood and stretched. I should let you get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. Lydia set aside her book. What time should I wake? Whenever you want. There's no need to keep my schedule. I'd like to help. What time do you usually rise? Grant looked uncertain. Dawn. But Lydia, you don't have to seek. I want to, please. Let me help. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Dawn, then. I'll knock on your door. They stood there awkwardly, two married people who didn't know how to say goodnight to each other. Finally, Grant said, Sleep well, Lydia. You too, Grant. She retreated to her small room and closed the door, leaning against it with her heart pounding. Through the wall, she could hear Grant moving around in his own room, the creak of the bed as he settled in. Her husband, sleeping just a few feet away. But he hadn't touched her, hadn't demanded anything, hadn't even tried to kiss her properly at the wedding. He'd given her exactly what he'd promised: space, time, respect. Lydia changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, pulling the heavy quilts up to her chin. The bed was comfortable, the room was warm, and outside her window she could see stars brighter than any she'd ever seen in Philadelphia. She was married, she had a home, she was safe. For the first time in 6 years, Lydia fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow would bring. The days developed a rhythm. Grant would wake before dawn and do his morning chores, feeding the cattle, milking the cow, collecting eggs. Lydia would rise with him and make breakfast. They'd eat together, talking little but comfortably. Then Grant would head out to work on the ranch while Lydia tackled the household tasks. But she was restless with so little to do. The house was small and stayed clean easily. By the third day, she'd reorganized every cupboard and scrubbed every surface twice. I could help outside, she suggested over breakfast one morning. Grant looked up from his coffee. It's cold out there, and the work is hard. I'm not afraid of hard work. I know, but please, Grant. I'm going mad with nothing to do. Let me help. He sighed, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. You're stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not. He took another sip of coffee. All right, dress warm. I'll teach you to feed the chickens and collect eggs properly. And you can help me mend the fence in the south pasture if you're really determined to freeze your fingers off. Lydia grinned. Thank you. Working outside was indeed cold and hard, but Lydia loved it. She loved the way the morning air bit at her cheeks, the way her breath made clouds, the satisfaction of completing physical tasks. Grant was a patient teacher, showing her how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to check for eggs without disturbing the hens too much, how to hold the fence wire taut while he hammered. They worked side by side in companionable silence, and Lydia found herself watching him when he didn't notice. The way his hands moved with practiced efficiency, the way he murmured gentle words to the cattle when he checked on them, the way he always made sure she was warm enough, offering his gloves when her fingers got too cold. He was kind, genuinely, deeply kind. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Lydia was hanging laundry on the line when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see a wagon approaching, driven by a woman about her own age with bright red hair and a friendly face. Hello, the woman called, pulling her wagon to a stop. You must be Grant's new wife. I'm Sarah Mitchell. My husband Tom and I have the ranch about 3 miles east. Lydia Mercer, pleased to meet you. Sarah hopped down from the wagon with surprising agility for someone heavily pregnant. I would have come sooner, but the baby's been keeping me sick as a dog. I'm finally feeling human again, so I thought I'd come welcome you properly. She pulled a cloth-covered basket from the wagon. I brought you some preserves and a cake. Nothing fancy, but I figured you might appreciate... She stopped mid-sentence, staring at Lydia's dress. Or rather, at the fact that Lydia only owned 2 dresses, both worn and patched. Oh, honey, Sarah said softly. Did you come all the way from back east with just what you're wearing? Lydia felt her cheeks burn. I didn't have much to bring. Sarah's expression shifted to determination. Well, that won't do. I've got dresses I can't wear anymore because of this belly, and probably won't fit into again after the baby comes either. You and I are about the same size when I'm not shaped like a barn. Come inside and let's have some tea, and I'll tell you all about the other ranchers around here. Despite her embarrassment, Lydia found herself warming to Sarah immediately. The woman was forthright and kind, with a laugh that filled the small house. They spent the afternoon drinking tea and talking, and Lydia learned that there were about a dozen ranching families scattered across the valley, most of them struggling but hopeful. "Grant's a good man," Sarah said, helping herself to another slice of the cake she'd brought. "Quiet as a stone, but good-hearted. When Tom broke his leg last spring, Grant came over every day for 2 weeks to help with our cattle. Wouldn't take a penny for it either." "He seems very kind." "He is, and lonely too after his brother passed. We were glad to hear he'd found someone." Sarah studied Lydia with shrewd but friendly eyes. "It's hard, isn't it, marrying a stranger?" Lydia saw no point in lying. "Yes, but not impossible. Tom and I had an arranged marriage ourselves. Our parents decided it between them when we were children. We barely knew each other when we married. I cried for a week straight, certain I'd made a terrible mistake." Sarah smiled at the memory. "But we grew to love each other. It took time and patience and a lot of stubborn determination, but we did it. You and Grant can too, if you both want it." "I think I do want it," Lydia admitted, "but I don't know if he feels the same." Sarah laughed. "Honey, the man placed an advertisement for a wife. That tells you he wants companionship. Give it time. Let him see who you are. Let yourself see who he is. Love doesn't always come in a lightning bolt. Sometimes it grows slow and steady, like a good crop." When Grant came in that evening, he found Lydia wearing one of Sarah's dresses, a deep blue wool that actually fit properly, and the house full of the smell of the stew Sarah had helped her make with vegetables from the Mitchell's root cellar. He stopped in the doorway, staring. "That dress," he said, "it's new. Sarah Mitchell came by. She lent me several dresses and some fabric to make more." Lydia smoothed the skirt self-consciously. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind? You look—" He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "You look nice. Real nice." It was the first compliment he'd paid her appearance, and Lydia felt warmth spread through her chest. Over supper, she told him about Sarah's visit, about the other ranching families in the valley. "The Mitchells are good people," Grant said. "Tom's a hard worker. Sarah's—" He paused, searching for words. "She talks a lot." Lydia laughed. "She does. But I liked her. She invited us to dinner next week." Grant looked uncomfortable. "You can go if you want. I'm not much for social occasions." "She invited both of us." "I know, but I'll probably just say something stupid and embarrass you." Lydia set down her fork and looked at him seriously. "Grant, you're one of the smartest men I've ever met. You run this entire ranch by yourself. You built this house with your own hands. You know about cattle and horses and the land. Why would you embarrass me?" "Because I don't know how to make small talk. I don't know how to tell jokes or stories that make people laugh. I'm better with animals than people." "I'm better with books than people," Lydia said. "Maybe between the two of us we'll manage." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You really want me to come with you?" "You're my husband. Of course I want you to come with me." Grant ducked his head, but Lydia saw the small smile that crossed his face. "All right, we'll go together." That night, as had become their custom, they read by the fire. Grant sat on the floor again, and Lydia was in the armchair with her book. But tonight, Grant kept glancing at her over his pages, and when their eyes met, he didn't immediately look away. "What?" Lydia finally asked. "Nothing, just that dress really does look nice on you." Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. And I'm glad Sarah came by. I was worried you might be lonely out here with just me for company." "I'm not lonely," Lydia said honestly. "This is the least lonely I've been in a long time." Grant's expression softened. "Me too." They held each other's gaze for a moment longer, something fragile and new stretching between them. Then Grant cleared his throat and returned to his book, and Lydia did the same. But she found herself reading the same page 3 times, too aware of Grant sitting a few feet away, too aware of the way her heart was beating just a little faster. 2 weeks into their marriage, a cold snap hit the valley. The temperature plummeted, and ice formed on the water troughs. Grant was up before dawn, breaking ice and making sure the cattle had access to water. Lydia helped where she could, her fingers going numb despite the gloves Grant had insisted she wear. They were walking back to the house for breakfast when Grant suddenly stopped and swore under his breath. "What is it?" He pointed to the roof of the barn. "Damn, the snow's piling up too much. I need to clear it before the weight causes damage." "I'll help." "No." His voice was firm. "It's dangerous up there when it's icy. I'll do it." Lydia wanted to argue, but she saw the set of his jaw and decided to pick her battles. "Be careful." She went inside to make breakfast, watching through the window as Grant climbed onto the barn roof with a shovel. He worked methodically, clearing the snow section by section. Lydia was just setting the table when she heard it, a sharp crack, followed by Grant's shout. She ran outside in time to see him sliding down the icy roof, scrabbling for purchase. He managed to catch himself at the edge, but his shovel went tumbling to the ground below. "Grant!" Lydia ran toward the barn, her heart in her throat. "I'm all right," he called down, though his voice was strained. "Just slipped. The ice is worse than I thought." "Come down, please. We can do it later when it's warmer." "I'm almost done. Just let me—" "Grant Mercer, if you fall off that roof and break your neck, I swear I'll—" She stopped, surprised by the force of her own fear. Grant looked down at her, and something in his expression changed. Slowly, carefully, he made his way to the ladder and climbed down. When he reached the ground, Lydia was there, her hands gripping his arms. "You scared me," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" He stopped, staring at where her hands clutched his coat. "Lydia, you're trembling. Because you almost fell." "But I didn't. I'm fine." "This time. But what about next time? What if you'd hit your head or broken a leg or—" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I can't lose someone else, Grant. I can't." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He covered her hands with his own, warming them. "I'm all right. See? Not a scratch. Promise me you'll be more careful." "I promise." His voice was gentle. "I promise, Lydia." They stood there in the cold, hands clasped, something shifting between them. Grant's thumb brushed over her knuckles, and Lydia felt the touch all the way through her body. "You care," he said softly, wonderingly. "You actually care if something happens to me." "Of course I care. You're my husband. No, I mean, you really care. Not just because I'm your husband, but because—" He seemed to struggle for words. "Because I'm me." Lydia realized it was true. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Grant had stopped being just the stranger who'd saved her from Aunt Margaret. He'd become a person she knew, someone she respected, someone whose absence would leave a hole in her life, someone she was starting to care about more than she'd expected. "Yes," she said simply. "I care." Grant's hands tightened on hers. For a moment, Lydia thought he might kiss her, really kiss her, not the chaste touch on her forehead from the wedding. She saw him lean in slightly, saw the way his eyes dropped to her lips. But then he pulled back, releasing her hands. "We should go inside. You're freezing." Disappointment flooded through her, but Lydia nodded. They walked back to the house together, and neither of them mentioned what had almost happened. But that evening, when they sat by the fire to read, Grant didn't sit on the floor. He settled on the other end of the armchair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. And when Lydia's eyes grew heavy and her head began to droop, Grant gently took the book from her hands. "Go to bed, Lydia. You're exhausted." She stood on sleepy legs, and Grant stood with her. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night." But as she started toward her room, Grant caught her hand. She turned back, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said, "for caring if I fall off the roof, for being here, for everything." Lydia squeezed his hand. "Thank you for giving me a home." "This isn't just a home, Lydia. It's your home. You're not a guest here. You belong here now as much as I do." The words settled into her chest, warm and sure. She belonged here. She had a place, a purpose, a person who cared if she lived or died. It was more than she had ever hoped for. That night, Lydia lay awake in her small room, listening to the wind beginning to pick up outside. It had started as a whisper against the windows, but was growing stronger with each passing hour, rattling the shutters and moaning through the eaves. She pulled her quilts closer and tried to sleep, But something felt wrong. The air had changed, grown heavier somehow, charged with a tension that made her skin prickle. She must have finally dozed off because she woke to the sound of Grant's boots in the main room. The window showed only darkness. It was still the middle of the night. Lydia pulled on her shawl and opened her door to find Grant already dressed, pulling on his heavy coat. "What's wrong?" she asked. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Did I wake you? I'm sorry. There's a storm coming in. A bad one. I can feel it. I need to make sure the barn doors are secured and get the cattle closer to the windbreak." As if to emphasize his words, a powerful gust of wind slammed against the house, making the whole structure shudder. Lydia's eyes widened. How bad? Bad enough. These winter storms come down from the mountains without warning, and when they hit... He shook his head. "I've seen them bury fences overnight. I need to go now before it gets worse." "I'm coming with you." "No." Grant's voice was firm. "You stay here where it's safe and warm." "Grant, if it's as bad as you say, you might need help. What if something happens?" "Which is exactly why you're staying here." He crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. "Please, Lydia. I need to know you're safe. I can't worry about you and handle the cattle at the same time." She wanted to argue, but she saw the genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but please be careful." "I will. Keep the fire going and stay inside no matter what you hear." He squeezed her shoulders gently, then released her and grabbed his hat. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. Lydia stood at the window and watched his lantern bob across the yard toward the barn, getting smaller and smaller until the swirling snow swallowed it completely. The storm hit with terrifying speed. Within minutes, the wind was howling like a living thing, throwing snow against the windows so hard Lydia feared the glass would shatter. The house creaked and groaned around her, and she fed more wood into the stove, trying to keep the cold at bay. An hour passed. Then another. Lydia paced the small main room, straining to hear anything over the wind's fury. Where was Grant? Surely it shouldn't take this long just to secure the barn and move the cattle. She told herself he was fine, that he knew what he was doing, that he'd lived through storms like this before. But her mind kept conjuring terrible images. Grant lost in the blinding snow, freezing to death mere feet from the house. Grant injured and unable to make it back. Grant. A tremendous crash made her jump. It sounded like it came from the direction of the barn, but she couldn't be sure over the wind. Lydia ran to the window, cupping her hands around her eyes to peer out, but she could see nothing but a white wall of swirling snow. Another hour crept by. The clock on the mantel showed 3:30 in the morning. Grant had been gone for nearly 3 hours now. Something was wrong. Lydia felt it in her bones, the same way she'd felt it when her mother's fever had taken a turn for the worse. The same certainty that if she didn't act, someone she loved would... She stopped mid-thought, her hand pressed against the cold glass. Someone she loved. When had that happened? When had Grant stopped being just the stranger who'd offered her escape and become someone she couldn't bear to lose? But there was no time to examine that revelation. If Grant was in trouble, she had to help him. Lydia pulled on every piece of warm clothing she could find. 2 dresses layered over her shift, Grant's spare coat over her own shawl, 2 pairs of stockings, her sturdiest shoes. She wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed, grabbed the lantern from the table, and pushed open the door. The wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Snow blasted into her face, stealing her breath, blinding her. Lydia had never experienced anything like this. The storm was a physical force trying to drive her back into the house. For a moment, she almost retreated. This was madness. She'd freeze to death before she made it 10 feet. But Grant was out there somewhere. Lydia bent her head against the wind and stepped out into the storm. The world disappeared. She couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything beyond a few feet in any direction. The snow was already knee-deep and getting deeper by the minute. Each step was a battle, the wind shoving her sideways, the cold biting through her layers of clothing like they were nothing. She held the lantern up, but its light barely penetrated the swirling white. Still, she pushed forward, aiming for where she knew the barn should be. Her feet were already going numb, and she'd only been outside for minutes. "Grant!" she screamed, but the wind tore the words from her mouth and scattered them. "Grant!" No answer. just the relentless howl of the storm. Lydia kept moving, one painful step at a time. Her lungs burned from breathing the frigid air. Ice was forming on her eyelashes, making it even harder to see. She had no idea if she was even going in the right direction anymore. Everything looked the same, just endless, blinding white. Then her foot hit something solid, and she fell forward, landing hard in the snow. The lantern flew from her hand and went out, plunging her into darkness, broken only by the weird white glow of the storm. Lydia pushed herself up, gasping, and felt around for what had tripped her. Her hand touched fabric, then an arm. "Grant!" She scrambled forward, digging through the snow until she found him. He was lying on his side, not moving, one hand still reaching toward the house he'd been trying to get back to. Snow was already piling on top of him, trying to bury him. "Grant, please, wake up!" She shook him, and he groaned softly. Alive, thank God he was alive. But he didn't open his eyes. Lydia's hand searched frantically and found the wound, a gash on the side of his head, still bleeding, the blood freezing on his face. He must have been hit by something, maybe debris from the barn. She had to get him inside. But he was easily twice her weight, and they were at least 50 feet from the house. Lydia looked around desperately, trying to get her bearings, but she could barely see anything. The wind was getting worse, the cold more vicious. They would both die out here if she didn't do something. "Grant, I need you to wake up," she said, leaning close to his ear. "I can't carry you by myself. Please, Grant, you have to help me." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Lydia?" "Yes, it's me. You're hurt, but we need to get you inside. Can you stand?" "You shouldn't be out here." His words were slurred. "Told you to stay inside." "Well, I didn't listen. Now come on." She got her shoulder under his arm and tried to lift. Grant groaned but managed to get his feet under him, leaning heavily on her. He was nearly dead weight, barely conscious, and Lydia felt panic claw at her throat. They'd never make it. But she had to try. She half-dragged, half-carried him through the snow, her muscles screaming in protest. Grant tried to help, his feet shuffling forward, but he kept stumbling. Every few feet they had to stop so Lydia could catch her breath, her lungs burning from the effort and the cold. "Keep moving," she gasped. "Just a little further." But the truth was, she had no idea how much further. She couldn't see the house. She was navigating purely on instinct and desperate hope, dragging them both through the storm toward what she prayed was safety. Grant's legs gave out, and they both went down in the snow. Lydia struggled to pull him back up, but he was too heavy, and she was too exhausted. "Get up," she pleaded, on the verge of tears. "Please, Grant, get up. I can't do this without you." "Leave me," he mumbled. "Save yourself." "No!" The word came out fierce, furious. "I didn't come all the way from Philadelphia, didn't marry you, didn't start to care about you, just to watch you die in the snow. Now get up." Maybe it was the anger in her voice, or maybe some part of him recognized that she meant every word, but Grant's eyes focused slightly. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself up with Lydia's help. They staggered forward again, Lydia's arms wrapped around Grant's waist, taking as much of his weight as she could. Her hands were numb. Her feet were numb. Everything was numb except the burning in her chest and the fierce determination that they would not die here. Not tonight, not like this. Then, like a miracle, she saw it. A faint glow through the snow. The house. She'd left the door open and the light from the stove was barely visible through the storm, but it was there. "Almost there," she told Grant. "Just a little further. You can make it." 20 more feet. 15. 10. They fell through this doorway together, landing in a heap on the floor. Lydia kicked the door shut behind them, cutting off the wind's scream. For a moment, she just lay there, gasping, her whole body shaking from exhaustion and cold. But Grant was bleeding and half frozen. She couldn't rest yet. Lydia forced herself up and dragged Grant closer to the stove. His lips were blue, his skin like ice. She peeled off his wet coat and boots, then ran to her room for every blanket she owned. She wrapped him in them, tucked them around him, then added more wood to the stove until the fire roared. The wound on his head was still bleeding. Lydia fetched water and clean cloth, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the basin. She cleaned the gash as gently as she could, relieved to see it wasn't as deep as she'd feared, though it would need stitches. She'd watched her mother sew up her father's hand once after a factory accident. She could do this. She threaded a needle with trembling fingers and, whispering apologies with every stitch, sewed the wound closed. Grant barely stirred, which frightened her more than if he'd been screaming. When she was done, she bandaged his head and checked him for other injuries. Aside from some bruising and the head wound, he seemed intact, but he was so cold, too cold. Lydia stripped off her own wet outer layers and lay down beside Grant, wrapping her arms around him, trying to share what little warmth she had. His skin felt like marble against hers. "Don't you dare die," she whispered against his chest. "Do you hear me, Grant Mercer? You promised to take care of me, and you can't do that if you're dead. So you stay with me." She held him through the long hours of the night while the storm raged outside. Slowly, painfully slowly, she felt warmth begin to return to his skin. His breathing, which had been so shallow she could barely detect it, deepened and steadied. Dawn came gray and dim, barely visible through the snow-covered windows. The storm was still raging, but with less fury than before. Lydia was exhausted, every muscle aching, but she didn't dare leave Grant's side. His eyes opened. For a moment he stared at the ceiling, disoriented. Then his gaze found her, and his brow furrowed. "Lydia?" His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "I'm here." What happened?" "You were hit by something in the storm. I found you in the snow and brought you back. You have a head wound, but you're going to be fine." Grant lifted a hand to his bandaged head, wincing. "You came out in the storm? After I told you to stay inside?" "Yes." "You could have died." "So could you. So you're welcome." He stared at her, and she saw a dozen emotions cross his face. Shock, gratitude, confusion, and something else. Something that made her breath catch. "You saved my life," he said softly. "You gave me a life worth saving. It seemed only fair to return the favor." Grant's hand found hers under the blankets, his fingers lacing through hers. "I've never had anyone—" He stopped, his voice breaking slightly. "Daniel would have just told me I was stupid for going out in the storm in the first place. My father would have said I deserved whatever I got. But you risked your life for me." "Of course I did." Lydia squeezed his hand. "You're my husband. Is that the only reason?" She met his eyes, saw the vulnerability there, the hope he was trying hard to hide. And she realized that this moment, right here, was when everything would change. She could retreat behind the safe walls of propriety and duty, or she could tell him the truth. "No," she whispered. "That's not the only reason." Grant's eyes widened. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Lydia," he breathed, "I know this isn't how these things usually work. I know we're supposed to be strangers who slowly learn to tolerate each other, but somewhere in the past few weeks you stopped being a stranger to me. You became everything." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes. "When you didn't come back, when I thought you might be dead, I realized that I couldn't imagine this life without you in it. Not because I need you to survive, but because I want you in it." "Is that enough?" Grant asked. "Is wanting enough to build something real on?" "I think so. I think maybe wanting is where love starts." The word hung between them, fragile and new and terrifying. Grant's eyes searched hers, and then, slowly, carefully, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. It was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was warm and real and full of all the things they couldn't quite say yet. Lydia kissed him back, her hand curling into his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, to this man, to this feeling blooming in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You're wrong. You deserve everything I can give you, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They lay there together, wrapped in blankets by the fire, while the storm continued to rage outside. But inside, in the small house that had become their home, something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained had crumbled, and in its place was something raw and real and worth fighting for. When Grant was strong enough to sit up, Lydia made him eat soup and drink hot coffee. She checked his wound, relieved to see it wasn't showing signs of infection. He protested weakly that he needed to check on the cattle, but one look from Lydia sent him back under the blankets. "The cattle will survive or they won't," she said firmly. "But you're not going back out in that storm, so you might as well stop arguing." A smile tugged at Grant's lips. "Yes, ma'am." The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being snowbound together in the small house. 3 days of learning each other in ways they hadn't before. They talked for hours about their childhoods, their losses, their hopes. Grant told her about building the ranch with Daniel, about the dreams they'd had for the place. Lydia told him about her mother's stories, about the life she'd left behind in Philadelphia. "Do you miss it?" Grant asked on the second day, as they sat together by the fire. "Philadelphia? No. There's nothing there for me but bad memories. But the city itself, the people, the shops, the culture, this must seem like the middle of nowhere compared to that." Lydia looked around the small room, at the simple furniture, the rough-hewn walls, the view through the window of nothing but snow and sky. Then she looked at Grant, at his earnest face and worried eyes. "This doesn't feel like nowhere," she said softly. "This feels like home." The relief in his expression was almost painful to see. He pulled her close, tucking her against his side, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. On the third night, when the storm finally began to ease, Grant said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About sleeping arrangements." Lydia's heart skipped. "Oh?" "You've spent the past 3 nights on the floor next to me, making sure I didn't develop a fever, or worse. You must be exhausted, and I—" He paused, clearly struggling for words. "I've gotten used to having you close. These past few nights, knowing you were there, it's the best I've slept since Daniel died." "What are you saying?" Grant took a deep breath. "I'm saying that your room is still yours if you want it. You can have all the space you need, but if you wanted, if you were willing, I'd like you to share my bed. Not because I expect anything," he added quickly, color rising in his cheeks. "Just to sleep, to be close. Would that be all right?" Lydia thought about her small room, which she'd appreciated for the privacy and safety it represented. But she thought too about these past 3 nights, about the comfort of Grant's steady breathing beside her, about the way his presence made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before. "I think I'd like that," she said. That night, Lydia moved her few belongings into Grant's room. It was larger than hers, with a bigger bed and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Grant had clearly cleaned it obsessively before her arrival. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere. They lay down together, both stiff and awkward at first, careful not to touch. But slowly, naturally, they drifted closer. Grant's arm came around her waist. Lydia's head found the hollow of his shoulder. And they fell asleep that way. 2 people who had been strangers a month ago, now tangled together like they'd been doing it all their lives. When morning came and the storm had finally blown itself out, they woke to a world transformed. Snow had buried everything, the fences, the pathways, half the barn. It would take days to dig out. But Grant was alive, Lydia was alive, and they were together. Grant insisted on checking the cattle despite Lydia's protests, but she went with him this time, helping him break through the snowdrifts. They'd lost 2 head to the storm, which hurt, but the rest had survived by huddling together in the windbreak Grant had driven them to. As they stood in the brilliant sunshine, surveying the damage and the beauty of the snow-covered valley, Grant said, "I should have listened to you." "About what?" "About being careful. About not taking stupid risks. If you hadn't come after me." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "But I did. And you're fine. We're both fine. Because of you." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I've been alone for so long, Lydia. I forgot what it was like to have someone who cared if I lived or died. Someone who'd risk everything to save me." "You did the same for me," Lydia pointed out. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it forever. You saved me, Grant. I just returned the favor." "Is that what we do then? Save each other?" Lydia smiled. "I think that's exactly what we do." Grant pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms, and Lydia leaned into his warmth. Around them, the world was white and silent and beautiful, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not just to a place, but to a person. They spent the rest of the day digging out, working side by side in the cold but brilliant sunshine. That evening, exhausted and aching, they collapsed together on the bed they now shared. Grant ran his fingers through Lydia's hair, gently working out the tangles. "Tell me about your mother," he said softly. "What was she like?" So Lydia told him about her mother's laugh, about the way she'd sung while doing housework, about her kindness and her strength. And when she was done, Grant told her about his own mother, about Daniel, about all the people they'd loved and lost. They shared their grief like they'd shared the blankets during the storm, wrapping it around both of them, making it something they could carry together instead of alone. "I wish they could have met you," Grant said, his voice rough with emotion. "Daniel especially. He would have liked you. He always said I needed someone who could match my stubborn streak." "I wish I could have met them too. Your mother sounds like she was wonderful." She was. She used to say that the measure of a person wasn't in what they had, but in what they'd give up for the people they loved. Grant's arms tightened around Lydia. "You nearly gave up your life for me. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me. You just have to promise me you'll be more careful from now on." "I promise, no more going out in storms alone, no more taking stupid risks." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "No more doing anything that might take me away from you." Lydia tilted her head back to look at him. "Grant?" "Yes?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." She felt him go very still, then his hand cupped her face, tilting it up so he could see her eyes in the firelight. "You think?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No, I know I'm falling in love with you." The smile that spread across Grant's face was like sunrise, slow and warm and beautiful. "Good," he said, "because I'm already there. I think I started falling the moment you stepped off that train, looking scared and brave and more beautiful than any woman has a right to be." "I wasn't beautiful. I was exhausted and rumpled," and he silenced her with a kiss, deep and thorough and full of everything he felt. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "You were beautiful," he said firmly. "You are beautiful. And somehow, impossibly, you're mine." "And you're mine," Lydia whispered back. They made love that night, slowly and tenderly, learning each other in the firelight. It wasn't the awkward, obligatory joining of a mail-order marriage. It was the coming together of two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Not just companionship or convenience, but real, deep, transformative love. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" Grant asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing. Everything's right. That's why I'm crying." She laughed through her tears. "A month ago, I was scrubbing floors for a woman who hated me, believing I was worthless and unwanted. And now I'm here, with you, and I'm happy. I didn't think I'd ever be happy again." Grant brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "A month ago, I was alone in this house, talking to ghosts and cattle, certain I'd spend the rest of my life that way. And now you're here, and suddenly the house feels full again. My life feels full again." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You gave me that, Lydia. You gave me a reason to look forward instead of back." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Lydia woke in the middle of the night, she took a moment to simply marvel at where she was. In a warm bed, in a solid house, in the arms of a good man who loved her. The scared, desperate girl who had answered that advertisement felt like a different person, someone from another life. But she wasn't a different person. She was just herself, finally allowed to be more than a servant, more than a burden. She was a wife, a partner, someone who mattered. She was loved. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Lydia's life. The snow slowly melted as winter began to give way to early spring. She and Grant settled into their new dynamic. No longer strangers, no longer just partners, but truly married in every sense of the word. They went to dinner at the Mitchells, and Lydia was delighted to see Grant slowly come out of his shell, telling stories about the ranch and even making Tom laugh with his dry observations. Sarah pulled Lydia aside at one point and said, "I don't know what you did to that man, but I've never seen Grant smile so much. You're good for him." "He's good for me too," Lydia replied, watching Grant help Tom with something in the barn, their voices carrying through the evening air. That's how it should be, Sarah said, patting her swollen belly. That's how you know it's real. On the ride home, Grant said, That wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. Lydia laughed. High praise indeed. I mean it. Tom's a good man, and Sarah's, well, she talks a lot, but she's kind. I'm glad you have a friend here. We have friends here, Lydia corrected. They're your friends, too. Grant smiled and took her hand. Our friends, then. As spring advanced, Lydia threw herself into making the ranch house truly feel like home. She planted herbs by the kitchen door, rosemary, thyme, sage. She sewed curtains for the windows from fabric Sarah had given her. She scrubbed the floors not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because this was her home and she took pride in it. And one morning in early April, as she was leaning over the basin to wash her face, a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grip the edge of the bureau to keep from falling. Grant was there instantly, his hand steadying her. What's wrong? I don't know. I just felt dizzy all of a sudden. Sit down, I'll get you some water. But as Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, another realization hit her, and her hand went instinctively to her stomach. She was late, more than 2 weeks late. Lydia? Grant knelt in front of her, concern etched on his face. Should I get the doctor from town? No, I don't think... I think I might be... She couldn't finish the sentence, afraid to say it out loud, afraid it might not be true. Understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. You think you might be pregnant? Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice. For a long moment, Grant just stared at her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that started small and grew until it lit up his entire being. Really? You really think so? I don't know for sure, but the signs... She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. I think there might be a baby. Grant's hand trembled under hers. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. And then, without warning, the smile vanished. His face went white, and he pulled his hand back as if burned. Grant, what's wrong? But he was already standing, backing away from her, his expression shifting from joy to terror in the space of a heartbeat. My mother, he said, his voice hollow. My mother died giving birth to me. Lydia felt her heart stop at those words. She watched Grant's face drain of color, watched him wrap his arms around himself as if trying to hold something inside that was threatening to break free. I was born, and she died, he continued, his voice shaking. The midwife said the bleeding wouldn't stop. My father held me once, then handed me to a neighbor and didn't look at me again for 3 days. He blamed me for her death. Maybe he was right to. Grant, no. I killed her, Lydia, my own mother, and now you're... He couldn't finish, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. What if the same thing happens to you? What if I lose you? Lydia stood on unsteady legs and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. Your mother's death was not your fault. You were a baby. Babies don't kill their mothers. Sometimes childbirth is just dangerous and terrible things happen. But what if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow? What if the ranch burns down? What if 1,000 other terrible things happen? She kept her voice steady, even though her own fear was rising to meet his. We can't live our lives afraid of what might happen, Grant. We can only deal with what is happening. And what is happening is that you're pregnant with my child, and you could die because of it. The raw pain in his voice nearly broke her. Lydia pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him as he shook. She felt wetness on her shoulder and realized he was crying, deep, silent sobs that shook his whole body. I can't lose you, he whispered against her hair. I can't. Not now. Not when I finally found something worth living for. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. No one knows that. He was right, and they both knew it. Women died in childbirth all the time, especially out here on the frontier where doctors were scarce and help was far away. It was a risk every wife faced, every time she became pregnant. But Lydia had not come all this way, had not built this life with Grant, had not fallen in love with him, only to let fear win now. You're right, she said, pulling back to look at him. I don't know that I'll survive, but I also don't know that I won't. And I refuse to spend the next several months living in fear of what might happen. This baby, our baby, is a blessing, Grant, a gift, and I intend to fight with everything I have to bring it safely into this world. But if something goes wrong, then we'll deal with it together, just like we dealt with the storm, just like we've dealt with everything else. She wiped the tears from his face with gentle fingers. I need you to be strong for me, Grant. I need you to believe that we can do this. He searched her face, and she saw the war raging inside him, the love he felt for her battling against the terror of losing her, the joy of a child fighting with the ghost of his mother's death. Finally, he pulled her close again, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I'll try, he whispered. God help me, I'll try. But Lydia, if it comes down to choosing between you and the baby, don't, she interrupted. Don't make that choice now. We have months before we need to think about such things. But she knew he was already thinking about it. She could feel it in the tension of his body, in the way his hands trembled slightly as they held her. The next few days were strange and strained. Grant was outwardly supportive, insisting Lydia rest more, do less of the heavy work, eat more at meals. But there was a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a careful distance that broke Lydia's heart. He was terrified, and he was already preparing himself to lose her. One evening, as they sat by the fire in silence, Grant pretending to read, Lydia pretending to sew, she finally couldn't take it anymore. Talk to me, she said. He looked up from his book. I am talking to you. No, you're being polite to me. There's a difference. Ever since we found out about the baby, you've been treating me like I'm made of glass, like I'm already dying. Grant flinched. That's not true. Isn't it? You barely touch me anymore. You watch me like you're memorizing my face. You wake up in the middle of the night and I can feel you staring at me, checking to make sure I'm still breathing. Her voice broke. You're already mourning me, Grant, and I'm still here. He set down his book with shaking hands. I'm trying to prepare myself. For what? For the worst, for losing you. Because if I let myself hope, if I let myself believe that everything will be fine and then it's not. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. I love my mother even though I never knew her. I love Daniel with everything in me. And when he died, it nearly destroyed me. But you, Lydia, losing you would finish the job. So instead you're going to spend the next several months pushing me away, building walls between us so it hurts less when I die? I don't know what else to do. The words exploded out of him. I don't know how to be happy about this baby when I'm terrified it's going to kill you. I don't know how to be the supportive husband you need when every time I look at you, all I can see is my mother bleeding to death while my father screamed for help that came too late. Lydia set aside her sewing and went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She felt him stiffen, then slowly relax into her embrace. I'm scared too, she admitted quietly. I'd be foolish not to be. But I'm also happy, Grant. Terrified and happy at the same time. Because we're going to have a baby. A child who's half you and half me. A child who might have your eyes and my mother's smile. A child who will grow up in this beautiful place with parents who love them and each other. If you survive. When I survive, she corrected firmly. I'm strong, Grant. Stronger than you think. I survived my mother's death. I survived 6 years with Aunt Margaret. I survived a 4-day train journey to marry a stranger. I survived that storm to save your life. I'm not going to let childbirth beat me. Grant turned in her arms, and she saw hope warring with fear in his eyes. You promise? I promise to fight. I promise to do everything in my power to come through this safely. That's all I can promise. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. It has to be enough, he whispered. It has to be. Over the following weeks, Grant slowly emerged from his fear, though Lydia could see him still struggling with it. He threw himself into preparing for the baby with an almost manic energy, building a cradle out of smooth pine wood, adding a room onto the house for the nursery, stockpiling supplies in case they got snowed in when the baby came. Grant, the baby isn't due until November, Lydia pointed out one day as he hauled in yet another load of firewood. That's 7 months away. I know, but I want to be ready. I want everything to be perfect. What he meant, Lydia understood, was that he wanted to control what he could, since he couldn't control whether she lived or died. She tried to be patient with him, but it was exhausting being treated like an invalid when she felt perfectly fine. The morning sickness passed after a few weeks, and aside from being tired more easily, she felt healthy and strong. One afternoon in late May, Sarah Mitchell came to visit, her own belly huge and round. She was due any day now. She took one look at Grant hovering anxiously while Lydia tried to hang laundry and shook her head. "Grant Mercer, go find something to do that's not watching your wife like she's about to shatter." "I'm just helping." "You're smothering her is what you're doing. Now go on. Lydia and I need to talk woman things, and you'll just be in the way." Grant looked torn between relief at being dismissed and reluctance to leave Lydia alone. Lydia gave him an encouraging nod, and he finally trudged off toward the barn. "Men," Sarah said, shaking her head as she lowered herself carefully onto the porch bench. "They go to pieces when their wives are expecting. Tom was the same way with our first. Wouldn't let me lift anything heavier than a spoon." "Grant's terrified I'm going to die," Lydia said quietly. "His mother died giving birth to him." "Ah." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "That explains it. Poor man. And poor you, having to deal with his fear on top of your own." I am scared," Lydia admitted, "but I'm trying not to let it consume me. Grant's doing enough of that for both of us." "Well, let me ease your mind a little. I've had 3 babies, and I'm about to have a 4th. It's not easy, and it's not painless, but it's not the death sentence men seem to think it is. Most women come through it just fine." "Most isn't all." "No," Sarah agreed. "But living isn't guaranteed for any of us. You could get kicked by a horse tomorrow, or catch pneumonia, or any number of things. We can't live in fear of dying, or we'll never really live at all." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "That's what I keep trying to tell Grant." "Then keep telling him. And in the meantime, let him build his cradles and stockpile his firewood. It makes him feel like he's doing something useful. Just don't let him wrap you in cotton and put you on a shelf." They talked for hours that afternoon, about pregnancy, about childbirth, about what to expect and how to prepare. Sarah's frank, practical approach to the whole thing made Lydia feel better than all of Grant's anxious hovering ever could. "The most important thing," Sarah said as she prepared to leave, "is to have someone with you who knows what they're doing. A good midwife can make all the difference. There's a woman about 15 miles from here, Mary Two Feathers. She's Arapaho, and she's delivered more babies than anyone in 3 counties. She helped me with my last 2, and I swear by her. Do you think she'd come help me? I'm sure of it, especially if you send for her ahead of time. She lives with her grandson in a small cabin near Copper Creek. I'll draw you a map." When Grant came in that evening, Lydia told him about Mary Two Feathers. "I've met her," Grant said, surprising Lydia. "Her grandson's horse went lame about 2 years ago, and I helped them get it home. Good people. If Sarah trusts her, that's good enough for me. I'd like to send her a message. Let her know when the baby's expected and ask if she'd be willing to help. I'll ride out there tomorrow." "Grant, it's a 15-mile ride." "I'll ride out there tomorrow," he repeated firmly. "If it means you'll have someone who knows what they're doing when the time comes, I'll ride 100 miles. True to his word, Grant left at dawn the next morning. He returned late that evening with good news. Mary Two Feathers had agreed to come when Lydia's time arrived, provided they sent word at least a few days in advance if possible. She also said, Grant added, looking uncomfortable, that women carrying their first child should walk a lot in the later months. It helps with the birth, so you should keep active, not rest all the time like I've been making you do. Lydia hid a smile. I'll do my best. As spring turned to summer, Lydia's belly began to swell in earnest. She felt the baby move for the first time in June, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp and press her hand to her stomach. "Grant!" she called, and he was there instantly, anxiety written all over his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Give me your hand." She placed his palm on her belly and waited. A moment later, the baby moved again, and Grant's eyes went wide. That was the baby." He stared at her stomach in wonder, his whole face transforming. "Our baby." "Our baby," Lydia confirmed. Grant sank to his knees in front of her, pressing his forehead against her belly. Lydia ran her fingers through his hair, feeling the tension drain out of him for the first time in weeks. "I want this," he whispered. "God help me. I want this baby so much." I just want you more. Then have faith that you can have both. Over the following months, as Lydia's belly grew rounder and the baby's movements grew stronger, something shifted in Grant. He was still worried. She could see it in the way he watched her, in the preparations he continued to make, but there was joy there too now. Joy in feeling the baby kick, joy in building the cradle and the small wooden toys he carved by firelight, joy in placing his hand on Lydia's belly and talking to the child growing inside her. "You're going to love it here," he told her stomach one evening in late summer. "The mountains, the sky, the space to run and play. Your mother and I will teach you everything, how to ride a horse, how to read, how to be kind and strong." "And stubborn," Lydia added with a smile. "Between the two of us, this child doesn't stand a chance of being anything but stubborn." Grant laughed and kissed her belly, then her lips. "I love you," he said. "Both of you." "We love you too." In September, news came that Sarah Mitchell had safely delivered a baby boy. Grant and Lydia visited a week later, and Lydia held the tiny infant with a mixture of wonder and terror. "He's so small," she whispered. "You were that small once," Sarah said, looking exhausted but radiant. "So was Grant, believe it or not." "I don't believe it," Lydia said, looking at her large husband. The visit reassured Grant somewhat. Sarah had come through the birth healthy and strong, and the baby was thriving. Maybe, his eyes seemed to say, maybe it would be all right. But as October arrived and Lydia's due date drew nearer, Grant's anxiety returned with a vengeance. He barely slept, starting at every sound Lydia made. He rode to Mary Two Feathers' cabin twice to confirm she would come, bringing gifts of dried meat and flour to ensure her goodwill. "Grant, you're going to wear yourself out," Lydia said one evening as he paced the main room for the 100th time. "I can't help it. What if the baby comes early? What if we can't get word to Mary in time? What if you sit down and breathe?" Lydia interrupted. "You're making me dizzy watching you pace." He sat, but his leg bounced nervously. Lydia took his hand. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said. "When my time comes, I'm going to need you to be strong. Not just for me, but for yourself. Can you do that?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You're the strongest man I know. You survived losing your mother and your brother. You built this ranch from nothing. You survived that storm that should have killed you. You can survive this too." "But what if you don't?" Lydia cupped his face in her hands. "Then you'll survive that as well, because that's what you do. You survive, you keep going, and you'll raise our child and tell them about their mother who loved them so much she wasn't afraid to bring them into the world." Tears streamed down Grant's face. "I don't want to raise them alone. I want to raise them with you." "Then believe it's possible. Believe in me the way I believe in you." He pulled her close, and they sat that way for a long time, holding each other against the fear of what was to come. The first contractions started on a cold morning in early November, almost 2 weeks before the baby was due. Lydia woke before dawn with a tightening across her belly that made her catch her breath. She lay still, waiting, and 15 minutes later it came again. Labor. She was in labor. Grant woke to find her breathing through a contraction, and his face went white. "It's happening! It's happening," Lydia confirmed. "You need to ride for Mary now." "I can't leave you alone." "Grant!" She gripped his hand hard as another contraction rolled through her. "I'll be fine for a few hours, but if you don't go now, she might not get here in time. Please." He was torn. She could see it, but finally he nodded. "I'll ride as fast as I can. Don't—" He stopped, struggling for words. "Don't do anything until I get back." Despite the pain, Lydia smiled. "I'll try to keep this baby in, but I can't make any promises." Grant kissed her fiercely, then was gone, his footsteps thundering down the porch steps and toward the barn. Lydia heard the horse gallop away, and then she was alone. She got out of bed and began to prepare. Sarah had told her what to do: gather clean linens, boil water, make sure everything was ready. The contractions were still far apart, giving her time to work between them. By midday, the contractions were closer together and much stronger. Lydia gripped the edge of the table and breathed through them, counting the seconds until they passed. Where was Grant? Where was Mary? As if in answer to her thoughts, she heard horses outside. Grant burst through the door, followed by a small, elderly native woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. This is Mary Two Feathers, Grant said, out of breath from his hard ride. Mary, this is my wife, Lydia. I can see that, Mary said, her English accented but clear. She set down her bag and came straight to Lydia, placing a weathered hand on her belly. How far apart are the pains? 5 minutes? Maybe less? Good. Strong baby, impatient to be born. She looked at Grant, who was hovering anxiously. You did well to fetch me. Now I need you to bring water, lots of it, and gather all the clean linens you have. Grant nodded and hurried to comply. Mary guided Lydia to the bedroom and helped her into a clean nightgown. First baby? Mary asked. Yes. It will take time, maybe many hours. You must be patient and strong. She met Lydia's eyes. Your man is very afraid. His mother died in childbirth? Yes. He was the baby. Mary nodded, understanding. Then we will show him that not all births end in death. Now, let me check you. The hours that followed were the longest and hardest of Lydia's life. The contractions grew stronger and closer together until they seemed to blend into one continuous wave of pain. Mary was there through all of it, checking on Lydia, giving her sips of water, helping her change positions. Grant stayed too, despite Mary's suggestion that he might want to wait outside. I'm not leaving her, he said firmly. Then make yourself useful. Hold her hand. Give her something to squeeze when the pain comes. So Grant sat beside Lydia, letting her grip his hand so tightly he lost feeling in his fingers. He wiped her face with cool cloths. He whispered encouragement even though his own face was pale with fear. You're doing so well, he told her. So strong. I love you so much. Lydia wanted to respond, but another contraction seized her, and all she could do was cry out. Night fell. The contractions were coming constantly now, giving Lydia no rest between them. She was exhausted, drenched in sweat, certain she couldn't continue. I can't, she gasped. Grant, I can't do this. Yes, you can, he said fiercely. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. The baby is coming soon, Mary said, checking again. 1 more hour, maybe less. When I tell you to push, you push with everything you have. 1 more hour felt like an eternity, but Lydia held on. She held Grant's hand and looked into his eyes and drew strength from the love she saw there. Push now, Mary commanded. Lydia pushed with everything she had, screaming with the effort, again and again, until she thought she might die from the pain and exhaustion. Then suddenly, shockingly, the pressure released. A thin, angry wail filled the room. A girl, Mary announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced infant. You have a daughter. Lydia fell back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and joy. Grant stared at the baby like he'd never seen anything so miraculous. Mary cleaned the infant quickly and efficiently, then placed her on Lydia's chest. Lydia looked down at her daughter, so small, so perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she hadn't known was possible. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. The baby stopped crying and looked up at her with dark, unfocused eyes. Grant leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face. She's perfect, he breathed. She's absolutely perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, Mary said with satisfaction. A healthy baby, and the mother as well, too. The bleeding is normal. You both did good work. Grant looked at Mary with such profound gratitude that the older woman's stern face softened. Your mother would be proud, she said quietly. You have broken the curse of fear. This is a new beginning. After Mary cleaned up and made sure both mother and baby were stable, she prepared to leave. Grant tried to pay her, but she waved him off. You helped my grandson when you didn't have to. This is my way of repaying that kindness. She looked at the small family, Grant and Lydia, and the baby. You have a good life ahead of you. Cherish it. She left with her grandson, who had been waiting patiently outside, and Grant and Lydia were alone with their daughter. What should we name her? Lydia asked, watching the baby sleep on her chest. Grant was quiet for a long moment. Grace, he finally said. Because she's a gift we don't deserve. Grace Rowan Mercer, after your mother. Lydia felt tears well up. It's perfect. They lay there together, Grant, Lydia, and baby Grace, as the night deepened around them. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, but inside the small house, Everything was warm and safe and full of love. "You did it," Grant whispered, his hand gently touching Grace's tiny head. "You kept your promise. You survived." "We survived," Lydia corrected. "All three of us." Grant kissed her forehead, then Grace's, his tears falling on both of them. "I was so afraid of losing you that I almost forgot to be grateful for having you. I won't make that mistake again." "Good, because we're going to be together for a very long time." "Promise?" "I promise." As Grace made small, sleepy sounds between them, Grant and Lydia looked at each other with wonder. They had been strangers 6 months ago, a desperate girl fleeing abuse and a lonely man seeking companionship. They had come together out of necessity, not love, but necessity had grown into something real and deep and worth fighting for. They had saved each other in more ways than one, from loneliness, from fear, from the ghosts of their pasts. And now they had created a future together, one that was sleeping peacefully on Lydia's chest. "Tell me about your mother," Grant said softly. "I want Grace to know about the woman she's named for." So Lydia told him stories late into the night, about Rowan, the kind-hearted, about her laugh and her strength and her love. And Grant listened, memorizing every word so he could tell them to Grace when she was older. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white. Inside, a family that had been built from hope and desperation and love settled in for their first night together, whole and safe and finally home. The first weeks with Grace were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, of learning the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry, of marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch. Lydia was exhausted in a way she'd never been before, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from pouring yourself into something precious and worthwhile. Grant was transformed. The man who had been so terrified of losing Lydia was now utterly devoted to both his wife and daughter. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floors with Grace when she was fussy, sang her silly songs in his deep, rumbling voice that somehow always calmed her. "You're a natural," Lydia said one evening, watching him rock Grace to sleep. "I'm terrified every second that I'm doing something wrong," Grant admitted. "But I love her so much it hurts. Is that normal?" "I think that's exactly what being a parent is." As December arrived and the snow deepened around the ranch, they settled into a rhythm. Lydia nursed Grace while Grant handled the outdoor chores. Then he would take the baby so Lydia could rest or cook or simply sit by the fire and remember what it felt like to have two free hands. One particularly cold afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Grant opened it to find Sarah Mitchell standing there with a basket, her own baby bundled against her chest. "I know it's freezing, but I had to come see this miracle baby I've been hearing about," Sarah said, stamping snow off her boots. "Tom told me you rode like a demon to fetch Mary 2 feathers. Said he'd never seen anyone push a horse that hard." "I would have ridden through hell itself if it meant keeping Lydia safe," Grant said simply, taking Sarah's coat. Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You know, when you first placed that advertisement, people in town said you were foolish. Said no decent woman would answer it, that you'd either get no response or end up with someone looking to take advantage of you." "They were wrong," Grant said, glancing at Lydia. "They were very wrong. You got exactly what you asked for, someone with a heart that wished to be loved." Sarah smiled. "And I'd say you kept your end of the bargain, too. I've never seen two people more devoted to each other." Over tea, Sarah told them about life with 4 children, about the chaos and the joy and the constant exhaustion. She admired Grace, pronounced her perfect, and gave Lydia advice on everything from teething to diaper rash. "The hardest part," Sarah said as she prepared to leave, "is remembering that you're still a wife and not just a mother. It's easy to pour everything into the baby and forget about each other. Don't make that mistake." After she left, Lydia thought about those words. It was true that all her energy had been focused on Grace. She and Grant still slept in the same bed, but they were so exhausted they simply collapsed into it each night. They hadn't really talked, hadn't connected the way they used to. That evening, after Grace was finally asleep in her cradle, Lydia found Grant sitting by the fire staring into the flames. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling beside him. "How different everything is from a year ago. Last December I was alone in this house, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake placing that advertisement, wondering if anyone would even respond. He turned to look at her. And then you came, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. But I was still lonely, you know? We were strangers living in the same house, being polite to each other. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. You and Grace, you're everything, my whole world. He took her hand. But Sarah was right. We've been so focused on the baby that we haven't really been together. I miss you, Lydia. I miss talking to you, really talking, the way we used to. I miss that too. Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder. Tell me something. Anything. Something I don't know about you. Grant was quiet for a moment, thinking. When I was a boy, maybe 8 or 9, I used to climb to the top of this hill near our farm. I'd sit there for hours, looking out at the horizon, dreaming about all the places I'd go someday. I wanted to see the ocean, to travel to big cities, to have adventures. He smiled ruefully. Instead, I ended up on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere, doing the same work every day. Do you regret it? Not even a little. Because somewhere along the way, I realized that adventure isn't about going places or seeing things. It's about who you're with. And being here with you and Grace, that's the greatest adventure I could ask for. Lydia lifted her head to kiss him, soft and slow. I love you. I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to Grace's small snuffling sounds from the cradle. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Lydia? Grant said after a while. Yes? Thank you for answering my advertisement. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for Grace. Thank you for everything. Thank you for keeping your promise, Lydia replied. You said you'd give me a home and respect and a chance at happiness. You gave me so much more than that. What more could I have given you? Love. Real, deep, transformative love. The kind I'd stopped believing existed. Grant pulled her closer, and they stayed that way until Grace woke for her next feeding, demanding attention with lusty cries. As winter deepened and the new year arrived, life on the ranch found its pattern. Grace grew bigger and more alert, her dark eyes following Lydia and Grant around the room. She smiled for the first time in late January, and Grant nearly cried with joy. She smiled at me, he kept saying. Did you see? She really smiled. I saw, Lydia assured him, laughing at his excitement. But not everything was easy. One February morning, Lydia woke to find Grace burning with fever. The baby was listless and crying weakly, and Lydia felt panic rise in her chest. Grant, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Something's wrong with Grace. He was there instantly, pressing his hand to Grace's forehead. His face went pale. How long has she been like this? I don't know. She was fine when I fed her a few hours ago, but now... Lydia's voice broke. What if it's serious? What if... Don't, Grant said firmly, though she could see the fear in his eyes. Don't go there. We'll handle this. He was already pulling on his coat. I'll ride for the doctor in Stillwater. That's 6 miles, and there's a storm coming. I don't care if there's a blizzard. Our daughter needs a doctor. He kissed Lydia's forehead, then Grace's. Keep her cool with damp cloths. I'll be back as fast as I can. He was gone before Lydia could argue further. She spent the next hours doing everything she could think of, bathing Grace with cool water, trying to get her to nurse, praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. The storm Grant had mentioned hit with fury, and Lydia watched the snow fall with growing dread. What if Grant got lost? What if he couldn't find his way back? What if she lost both of them? But she couldn't think about that. She had to focus on Grace, on keeping her baby alive until help arrived. 4 hours later, she heard horses outside. Grant burst through the door, followed by an older man carrying a medical bag, Dr. Patterson from Stillwater. Let me see her, the doctor said, going straight to Grace. Lydia hovered anxiously as he examined the baby, listening to her chest, looking in her throat, feeling her stomach. The minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, Dr. Patterson straightened. It's croup. Common in babies this age, especially in winter. Her fever is high, but not dangerously so. Will she be all right? Lydia asked, hardly daring to breathe. With proper care, yes. You'll need to keep her upright as much as possible to help her breathe, give her lots of fluids, and monitor her fever. If it gets worse or she has trouble breathing, send for me immediately. But I think she'll pull through just fine." The relief was so intense that Lydia's legs nearly gave out. Grant caught her, holding her up while Dr. Patterson gave them detailed instructions. "You did well riding out in that storm," the doctor told Grant as he prepared to leave. "Many men would have waited until morning. Your quick action may have made all the difference." After the doctor left, Grant and Lydia took turns holding Grace upright, just as instructed. The baby slept fitfully, her breathing raspy but steady. By evening, her fever had started to drop. "She's going to be fine," Lydia whispered, more to convince herself than Grant. "She is," Grant agreed, though his face was drawn with exhaustion and residual fear. "She's a fighter, just like her mother." They stayed up all night with Grace, watching over her, taking turns so the other could rest. By morning, her fever had broken, and she was nursing normally again. Within 3 days, she was back to her usual self, smiling and cooing as if nothing had happened. But the scare had shaken both Grant and Lydia. They held Grace a little tighter, treasured each smile a little more, understood more deeply how fragile and precious life could be. "I thought I knew fear when you were in labor," Grant admitted one evening. "But seeing Grace so sick, so helpless, that was worse somehow. At least you could tell me what hurt, could fight alongside me. Grace is just a baby. She can't fight for herself." "That's why she has us to fight for her," Lydia said. "And we'll keep fighting for her, for as long as she needs us." "Forever, then." "Forever," Lydia agreed. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the valley in all its green glory, Grace continued to thrive. She laughed now, a bubbling sound that filled the house with joy. She was fascinated by everything: the chickens scratching in the yard, the way sunlight moved across the floor, her own tiny hands. Grant built her a small swing on the porch, and Lydia would sit there for hours, gently pushing Grace while telling her stories about her grandmother Rowan, about Ireland and Philadelphia, and all the places Lydia had been before finding her way here. "Your grandmother was brave," Lydia told her daughter. "She crossed an ocean all alone to build a better life. And my mother was brave too. She raised me with nothing but love and hope, even when times were hard. You come from a long line of strong women, Grace. Don't you ever forget that." Grace gurgled happily, reaching for a butterfly that floated past. One warm May afternoon, Tom and Sarah Mitchell came to visit with all 4 of their children. The adults sat on the porch while the children played in the yard, their laughter filling the air. "I have news," Sarah announced. "We're expecting again. Number 5. Lydia's eyes widened. "Sarah, that's wonderful. When?" "Late November, if I'm counting right." Sarah patted her still flat stomach. "I swore after the last one that we were done, but apparently God had other plans." "How do you do it?" Lydia asked. 4 children, soon to be 5, plus running a ranch? I'm exhausted with just one baby." Sarah laughed. "You get used to the exhaustion. It becomes your new normal. And honestly, the older ones help with the younger ones. It gets easier in some ways, harder in others." "Do you think you'll have more?" Tom asked Grant, his tone teasing. Grant glanced at Lydia, and she saw the question in his eyes. They hadn't talked about it yet. Grace was only 6 months old, but the thought had crossed Lydia's mind more than once. "Maybe," she said. "Someday. When Grace is older and we're ready." "Well, whenever you decide, at least you know you can do it," Sarah said. "You survived the first one, which is the scariest. The rest are just variations on a theme." After the Mitchells left, Grant helped Lydia clean up from their visit. Grace was napping in her cradle, giving them a rare moment of quiet. "Would you want more children?" Grant asked, echoing the earlier conversation. "I think so. Not right away, but eventually. Would you?" "I'd love to fill this house with children," Grant admitted. "Brothers and sisters for Grace, a whole family. But only if you want it too. I won't put you through that again if you don't want to." Lydia thought about the labor, about the pain, and the fear, and the exhaustion. But she thought too about holding Grace for the first time, about the overwhelming love she'd felt, about how that love had only grown stronger every day since. "I want it," she said. "Not now, but someday. I want Grace to have siblings. I want to fill this house with love and laughter and chaos." Grant pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Then that's what we'll do. We'll build the family we both always wanted but never thought we'd have. Summer brought hard work as they prepared for the coming winter. Grant taught Lydia more about ranch management, showing her how to keep the books, how to judge cattle health, how to make decisions about when to buy and sell. She was a quick learner, and he came to rely on her judgment as much as his own. We're partners, he told her one evening as they reviewed the accounts together. In everything. I don't want you to just be my wife. I want you to be my equal in running this ranch. Even though I knew nothing about ranching 6 months ago? You know plenty now, and you're smart and capable, and you see things I miss. He pointed to a notation she'd made in the ledger. Like this. I never would have thought to track the feed costs that way, but it makes perfect sense. Lydia felt pride bloom in her chest. She'd never been valued for her intelligence before, never been treated as an equal partner in anything. With Aunt Margaret, she'd been a servant. But here, with Grant, she was respected and trusted and given real responsibility. In August, they received a letter from Philadelphia. Lydia's hand shook as she opened it, wondering who could possibly be writing to her. She had no family left, no friends from those dark years. The letter was from a lawyer, informing her that Aunt Margaret had died of a stroke, and that Lydia, as her only living relative, was entitled to inherit the boarding house and whatever assets remained. Lydia stared at the letter, feeling nothing. No grief, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness where she thought emotion should be. What does it say? Grant asked. She handed him the letter. He read it, then looked at her with concern. Are you all right? I don't know what I am. She was cruel to me, made my life miserable. I should be glad she's dead, but I just feel nothing. That's understandable. She wasn't really family to you, not in any way that mattered. The lawyer wants to know if I want to claim the inheritance. The boarding house is heavily mortgaged, but there might be some money left after the debts are settled. Grant set the letter aside. That's your decision to make. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. Lydia thought about it for several days. Finally, she wrote back to the lawyer, instructing him to sell the boarding house and its contents, pay off all debts, and donate whatever remained to an orphanage in Philadelphia. She didn't want Aunt Margaret's money or property. She wanted nothing that would tie her to that life. When she told Grant her decision, he simply nodded. I think that's wise. You're building something new here. No point in dragging the past along with you. Exactly. Lydia felt lighter having made the decision. That chapter of my life is closed. This is my life now. You, Grace, this ranch. This is where I belong. As fall arrived and Grace's first birthday approached, Lydia and Grant planned a small celebration. They invited the Mitchells and Mary Two Feathers and a few other neighboring families. It would be the largest gathering the ranch had ever hosted. Are you sure about this? Grant asked nervously as they prepared. That's a lot of people. It'll be wonderful. Grace should know she has a community, that she's surrounded by people who care about her. The party was a chaotic, joyful affair. Children ran through the house while adults talked and laughed. Grace, overwhelmed by all the attention, cried and clung to Lydia until she finally fell asleep in her mother's arms, exhausted from her big day. Mary Two Feathers pulled Lydia aside before leaving. You have built a good life here, she said, gesturing to the house full of friends, to Grant playing with some of the older children, to Grace sleeping peacefully. When I came that night to deliver your baby, I saw two people held together by desperation and hope. Now I see a family bound by love. It is a good thing to witness. Thank you, Lydia said, feeling tears prick her eyes. Thank you for helping us, for everything. The courage was yours. I only helped guide it. Mary squeezed Lydia's hand. Your daughter will grow strong here. She is blessed to have parents who love each other as you do. After everyone left and the house was quiet again, Grant and Lydia stood on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Grace slept in Grant's arms, her tiny hand curled against his chest. A year ago today, she didn't exist, Grant marveled. Our daughter was just a possibility, a hope. And now she's here, real and perfect, and ours. A year and a month ago, we were strangers, Lydia added, standing on a train platform, scared and uncertain, having no idea what the future would hold. Do you ever regret it? Answering that advertisement, coming here, marrying me? Lydia looked at her husband, this good, kind, strong man who had given her everything she'd ever wanted and things she hadn't even known to hope for. She looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in his arms. She looked at the ranch house with its warm windows glowing in the twilight, at the mountains standing eternal in the distance, at the vast sky painted in shades of gold and purple. Never, she said firmly, not for a single second. This life, this family, this love, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Grant shifted Grace to one arm so he could pull Lydia close with the other. I placed that advertisement asking for someone with a heart that wished to be loved. But what I found was so much more than that. I found my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. I found you. And I found home, Lydia whispered. Not just a place, but a person. You're my home, Grant, you and Grace. They stood there as darkness fell, three people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something real and lasting from nothing but hope and determination. The mountains stood silent witness, as they had for millennia, as they would for millennia more. But tonight, in this small valley, in this modest ranch house, a family stood together, complete, content, and deeply, profoundly loved. 2 years later, Lydia gave birth to a son they named Daniel, after Grant's brother. The labor was easier this time, though no less intense, and Grant was calmer, his faith in Lydia's strength having been proven once already. Grace was enchanted by her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bath time. She sang to him the same silly songs Grant had sung to her, and Lydia's heart swelled watching her children together. "We're a family," Grace would announce proudly to anyone who would listen. "Mama and Papa and me and baby Daniel." "That's right," Lydia would agree, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "We're a family." The ranch prospered. Grant's careful management and Lydia's sharp mind for numbers meant they slowly expanded, buying more land, increasing their herd. They hired help during the busy seasons, though Grant insisted on keeping the operation small enough that he could still be present for his children. "I won't be the kind of father mine was," he told Lydia. "I won't let work consume me so much that I miss watching them grow." And he didn't. He taught Grace to ride when she was 4, patient and encouraging as she learned. He carved toys for Daniel and read stories to both children every night, his deep voice bringing the words to life. On winter evenings, they would gather by the fire, Grant in his chair, Lydia sewing or knitting, Grace practicing her letters at the table, baby Daniel playing with wooden blocks. It was simple and ordinary and absolutely perfect. One such evening, when Grace was 5 and Daniel nearly 3, Grace looked up from her slate. "Mama, tell us the story." "Which story, sweetheart?" "The story of how you and Papa met. You promised you'd tell us when we were old enough." Lydia glanced at Grant, who smiled and nodded. Their children were old enough now to understand, at least in simple terms. "Well," Lydia began, setting aside her knitting, "once upon a time, there was a girl who was very sad and very lonely. She lived in a big city far away from here, and she didn't think she'd ever be happy again." "Why was she sad?" Grace asked. "Because she'd lost the people she loved most, and she was living with someone who was very unkind to her. But then one day, she saw an advertisement in the newspaper. A man who lived far away was looking for a wife." "That was Papa!" Grace exclaimed. "That's right. Your Papa had written that he wanted someone with a heart that wished to be loved. And when the girl read those words, she felt hope for the first time in a long time." Grant picked up the story. "And when this girl, who was very brave, even though she didn't know it yet, wrote to the man, he was so happy, because he was lonely too, living all by himself in this big house with no one to talk to but the cattle." "So what happened?" Daniel asked, even though he was too young to fully understand. "The girl got on a train and traveled for 4 whole days to come meet the man," Lydia continued. "She was scared because she didn't know if he would be kind or mean, if he would keep his promises or break them." "But Papa's not mean," Grace said confidently. "No, he's not. And when the girl, who was your mama, met your Papa, she saw that he was good and kind and honest. So they got married, even though they barely knew each other." "And then they fell in love?" Grace asked, romantic even at 5. Grant and Lydia exchanged a smile. "Not right away," Grant admitted. "At first we were both a little scared of each other. We were polite and careful, like two people dancing around each other, trying not to step on toes. But slowly, Lydia said, we started to see each other, really see each other. And we realized that we liked what we saw. Your papa was kind and strong and made me feel safe, and I tried to make him happy and take care of him. And then there was a big storm, Grant said, his voice growing serious. The worst storm I'd ever seen. I went out to take care of the animals, but I got hurt. And your mama, even though I'd told her to stay inside where it was safe, she came out into that storm to find me. Was she scared? Grace asked, eyes wide. Terrified, Lydia admitted, but I was more scared of losing your papa than I was of the storm. So I found him in the snow and dragged him back to the house. Mama saved Papa's life, Grant said, pulling Lydia close. And that's when we both realized that what we had wasn't just a convenient arrangement. We really loved each other. And then they had me, Grace announced. Well, that came a little later, Lydia said, laughing. But yes, eventually we had you and then your brother, and now we're all here together. And we'll always be together, right? Grace asked, a hint of worry in her voice. Always, Grant promised. Your mama and I love each other very much, and we love you and Daniel more than anything in the whole world. We're a family, and families stick together. Satisfied, Grace returned to her letters while Daniel went back to his blocks. Lydia leaned against Grant's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. That's not quite how I remember it, he whispered in her ear. Oh? What did I leave out? The part where I fell so hard for you I could barely think straight. The part where every time you smiled at me I felt like I could conquer the world. The part where I thanked God every single day that you answered my advertisement. I left those parts out because they're just for us, Lydia whispered back. Some things are too precious to share, even with our children. Grant kissed her temple. I love you, Lydia Mercer. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that until the end of time. I love you too. You kept your promise, you know. Which one? All of them. You promised me a home, and you gave me this beautiful ranch. You promised me respect, and you treat me as your equal partner in everything. You promised me kindness, and you've shown me more kindness than I ever knew existed. She turned to look at him. But most of all, you promised me a chance at happiness, and you gave me so much more than that. You gave me joy, purpose, a family. You gave me everything. You're everything I hoped for, Grant said, echoing the words he would say to her again and again over the years. More than I deserve. You're wrong about that last part, Lydia said, as she always did. You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, snow began to fall gently, blanketing the valley in white. Grace's pencil scratched across her slate as she practiced forming letters. Daniel hummed tunelessly to himself, lost in the simple pleasure of stacking blocks. And Grant and Lydia sat together watching their children, marveling at the life they'd built from nothing but an advertisement and a leap of faith. She was no longer a maid, no longer a burden, no longer an unwanted girl scrubbing floors in a Philadelphia boarding house. She was a wife, a mother, a partner, a woman who was loved and valued and cherished. Grant was no longer a lonely rancher talking to ghosts, no longer a man haunted by his brother's death and his mother's fate. He was a husband, a father, a man who had found his purpose in loving and being loved. They had saved each other in the most fundamental way, not from death or danger, though they'd done that too, but from loneliness and despair and the terrible belief that they were unworthy of love. And in saving each other, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a real life with all its challenges and joys, its fears and triumphs, its ordinary moments of grace. This was their story, a story of courage and hope, of taking risks and reaping rewards, of love that grew slowly from the seeds of desperation into something strong enough to weather any storm. And as the snow continued to fall outside and the fire burned warm inside, as their children played and laughed and filled the house with life, Grant and Lydia held each other and knew, with absolute certainty, that they had found exactly what they'd been searching for. Not just a roof and a ring, but a love that was freely chosen, fiercely protected, and worth every risk they'd taken to find it. A love that would last a lifetime and echo through generations yet to come. A love that began with a simple advertisement and a desperate girl's hope, and grew into something neither of them could have imagined in their wildest dreams. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, deepest, most transformative form. And it was theirs, now and forever.